Chapter 82. NT. Thanks to Jan Henrik, Dux, Germany, Ivor Fennell, U.S., and Zachary Paul, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 82. Chapter 82. Creative Concept. So you are Yi Feng's little brother. You dared to come here and actually caused ruckus and trouble for everyone. You are quite courageous, aren't you? But you should have thought before offending the school regulations. When Shuyang said, "School regulations," Yi Shiwen laughed loudly. If people really cared about school regulations, then Yi Feng would not have been injured and all of this would not have happened as well. And those so-called school regulations were just an excuse to protect the weak. Strong never cared about these old regulations. Earlier, when Shuyang had bullied Yi Zaiwen's fellow disciples, then he did not think of school regulations. But now that the same thing had been done to his people, he suddenly remembered about it. It was quite hilarious. Cut the crap. Today I have come for just one thing, to return the favor by doing the same thing you did to my brother. Yi Shiwen sneered. You are courting death. One Shuyang said and glared at Yi Shiwen. He was the unrivaled genius of Shaoyang Sub-School, and no one dared to talk to him like this. So, the words of Yi Shiwen had made him extremely furious. One Shuyang rushed forward, almost like a blurred figure, while breaking through the sound barrier, causing a terrifying, piercing sound which spread throughout the sky. Immediately after that, many spectating disciples directly fell on the ground with their eardrums bleeding from this terrifying sound. Clang! A long blade appeared in the hands of Wen Shuyang that he'd taken out from the storage ring, and in a flash, his blade instantly chopped out towards Yi Shiwen. Wen Shuyang was very powerful compared to Huicheng or Su Liang, and was already at the Xiantian second stage with 30% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. Although his transformed Xiantian Jinqi was only 10% more than the other two, but his strength was already twice their strength. Yi Shiwen didn't demur and immediately unsheathed the long blade from his back with a clang sound and shot a terrifying bladiki towards the sky, and it seemed as if the moon was slowly rising. Instantly, the pressure dropped down in the surrounding area, clearly displaying that Yi Shiwen had already obtained a thorough understanding of his blade technique, and everyone was shocked when the true meaning of Yi Zaiwen's blade skill suddenly evolved in front of them. Although Wen Shuyang had also practiced a high-grade blade technique, but it was obvious that currently his blade skill was nowhere near the profound blade skill of Yi Shiwen. In a short time, Wen Shuyang would be able to reach the Deshang realm of his blade skill, and only then he might evolve out the creative concept of his blade skill. The difference between their mastery of blade skills alone was too big. What is this creative concept? I actually saw a moon pressed down by the blade attack. One of the disciples was stunned and said, Yi Zaiwen's blade technique could already bring forth the creative concept after it had been practiced to the Xiantian realm, and although the power of the move Full Moon Beheader was comparable to that of an advanced power technique, but Cold Moon Beheader was actually a Xiantian level blade technique, and even if the power contained in each of its move were different, but all of them contained an inherent creative concept. NT? Cold Moon Beheader is the name of Yi Zaiwen's blade technique, and Full Moon Beheader is one of the 3 moves offered by this technique. Only those power techniques which contained a creative concept could be called Xiantian power techniques, and if one could not bring forth the creative concept of a technique, then the Xiantian level techniques were no different from the advanced techniques. But if one could successfully understand and evolve out the creative concept of a technique, then the power of his technique would increase by leaps and bounds, and the technique would be able to display its ideal form. All of those outstanding disciples from different sub-schools, who were watching from the crowd, knew very well about the importance of the creative concept of a technique. They knew that even if someone was to practice a Xiantian level technique to the Deshang realm, they still might not be able to comprehend the creative concept hidden inside it and would only be able to harness its strength up to the advanced stage. Being able to realize the creative concept at such a young age was extremely rare. This is really a creative concept, I have only seen elders displaying the creative concept of their techniques. My God! How can it appear in the body of an ordinary person? Creative concept. It actually is a creative concept. Just by virtue of this creative concept, I'm sure the Yishuin will easily enter into the current top 10 great disciples. Countless people were shocked, including Wen Shiyang, who was the closest witness of Yi Zaiwen's terrifying display of the creative concept of his blade skill. When this creative concept was brandished, a terrifying pressure had appeared in the surrounding area, as if the sky had fallen down on the ground, and it seemed like the bright moon had appeared, but it actually didn't exist. But Wen Shiyang could vividly feel as if he was taking a walk on a moonlit road, and the bright moonlight was coming down from the heaven and had spilled on the ground, revealing even the slightest detail present in the scenery, leaving nowhere for the secrets to hide under this pure, white moonlight, which also contained a penetrating feeling. This kind of oppressive feeling had already made Wen Shiyang anxious about this fight, and his mind was also in a confused state. How is this possible? How is this possible? Wen Shiyang could not believe his eyes, because even practicing one move to the Desheng realm was very tough, and one could say that they had grasped the essence of the technique. But to be able to comprehend and display a creative concept was equivalent to completely commanding the power of that move to its utmost extent. Because all of these Xiantian level techniques or above were once realized and created by the experts, and these techniques were the so-called imitations of nature itself. Hence, there would definitely be a creative concept hidden inside them. In fact, these creative concepts had initially urged those experts to comprehend the moves based on these creative concepts and append them to form the power techniques. And only after truly comprehending the move to its acme, Yi Zaiwen's blade skill had evolved to such a terrifying extent and had displayed this clear and beautiful, but overwhelming, scenery to the spectators. And Yi Zaiwen's display of the creative concept was extremely clear, indicating that he had thoroughly mastered the move. It was simply unbelievable. There was a look of disbelief in the eyes of Wen Shiyang. To think that Yi Shiwen had not just reached the Desheng realm of his blade skill, but he had also comprehended its creative concept? But he didn't have time to be shocked, because if Yi Shiwen had actually evolved this level of creative concept, then he was definitely in a dangerous situation. He would never know that Yi Shiwen had the special space. For others, to be able to comprehend the creative concepts, they had to be very talented. But in Yi Zaiwen's case, so long as there were enough spirit stones in his possession, he would be able to completely understand and practice any technique. Yi Shiwen perhaps was not the most talented, nor the strongest, but he was hardworking, and so long as he had enough spirit stones, his practice speed would reach a terrifying level. Because for others, to practice and comprehend was like going into a huge tract of a library and read a variety of books to have an understanding and gain insights. For that, they needed to have high talent in order to find out the exact direction they needed to search and to find the answers. And they were lucky they might just find the right book. But this was not the case with Yi Shiwen, because he seemed to have an intelligent book's resolution system that could select the correct book for him, and so long as he swiped the card to pay the money, he could obtain just the book he needed, which would automatically be delivered to him, and he wouldn't have to go into the vast sea of books to search. Even for those geniuses, the chances of comprehending the creative concept were not high, let alone those ordinary disciples. Yi Shiwen chopped down his long blade, and the live picture drawn by the creative concept directly descended over Wen Shiyang's bladiki and instantly crushed it down under its terrifying pressure, which seemed as if the whole world was collapsing inch by inch. Their bladiki collided in the midair, and the friction caused a loud and sharp whistling sound, which then set off a wave of sound waves. Boom! Finally, Yi Zaiwen's bladiki instantly crushed the bladiki of Wen Shiyang and fiercely blasted into his body. Bang! Wen Shiyang's blade couldn't block this incredible attack from Yi Shiwen, and his body was sent flying horizontally, while he spat out a mouthful of blood. Wade's Day, Chapter 83 will come as a regular release, along with sponsored Chapter 84 and 85, depending on donations and my schedule. Raised so far, $22, 73%. Q status for Chapter 84, 73%. Q status for Chapter 85, 0%. Chapter 83, NT. This chapter is a regular release. Since the donation queue for sponsored chapters 84 and 85 didn't clear in time, there will come as sponsored releases on Thursday. Chapter 83. Fame spreads, everyone was silent. One move, just a single move. In a flash, the spectating disciples had witnessed how the reputation of Wen Shuyang was zapped and completely overwhelmed by a single flash of Yi Zaiwen's Xiantian Bladiki. There was a huge difference between Xiantian and Hotian Jin Qi, and 30% transformed Xiantian Jin Qi, in fact, had incredible density and toughness, but he was still nowhere near to be Yi Zaiwen's match. Yi Shiwen had used his creative concept combined with his Bladiki to display such an incredible prowess, and everyone was aware of the fact that, at that time, if Yi Shiwen had not restrained his true strength, then Wen Shuyang would definitely have been split in half. Although school regulations were relatively wide, but were not wide enough to allow killing someone in front of a large crowd, at least Yi Shiwen was not powerful enough to override school regulations. But today, if even he had died at the hands of Yi Shiwen, although it would have caused trouble, but Shaoyang Sub-School's people could only swallow the bitter pill. All of their Xiantian masters had been defeated, and their own strengths were not good enough. Also, nobody would come to show their sympathy to them, because everyone knew that people of the Shaoyang Sub-School were the real perpetrators this time, and this result was inevitable for them. Finished, really finished. All of the outstanding disciples of Shaoyang Sub-School had been defeated, and if they didn't recover in time before the beginning of school assessment, then Shaoyang Sub-School wouldn't be able to participate in the assessment because, without its top 3 Xiantian masters, it would have no chance to win. This entry assessment of the main sect was not just an ordinary assessment, because it was directly related to the future developments of the various sub-schools. In the main sect, the resources and facilities were allocated to these sub-schools based on the performance of their outstanding disciples, respectively. In the eyes of the main sect, although it allowed entry to weak disciples as well, but it only was a place for elite disciples from various sub-schools, so of course it would provide more rewards and resources to more powerful disciples, and these elite disciples would also get more resources in the coming year. This was the reason why the various sub-schools would not hesitate to spend their resources on these geniuses before sending them to the main sect. But now, all 3 Xiantian masters of Shaoyang Sub-School had been devastated effortlessly, and that too in front of everyone. It was totally inconceivable that this year's Shaoyang Sub-School was definitely the worst of the crowd, and this would directly affect the allocation of resources in the coming year for it. Earlier, when Shaoyang Sub-School disciples had gone to bully the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, they would never have expected that things would come to this, and that too by the interference of just one man. The fight between these 2 men had directly determined the status of the 2 sub-schools, and the results of this fight was that the reputation of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School had skyrocketed and become like a tough iron sheet, after completely destroying the reputation of Shaoyang Sub-School. After this, he would thoroughly become famous. A disciple, standing in the crowd, murmured. As if a big rock had been dropped in a calm lake, in a flash, Yi Zaiwen's fame had spread off like the intermittent waves. The news that Yi Shiwen had effortlessly defeated Shaoyang Sub-School's strongest disciple, Wen Shuyang, had spread among more than 100 sub-schools. Originally among thousands of disciples, Wen Shuyang was not one of the strongest and was only a minor celebrity. Even if Yi Shiwen had defeated Wen Shuyang, this was not that big of a deal for other elite disciples. But everyone present during the fight had seen how Yi Shiwen had used the creative concept of his blade technique to a profound level. This had made him to suddenly become a target and focus of attention of many people. In the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School's courtyard, Yi Feng was standing. He was a Xiantian master, so his resilience was very tough, plus he had consumed a lot of high-grade medicinal pills provided by Yi Shiwen, so his condition had become a lot better, and he could walk around easily. At this rate, he would be completely healed before the beginning of assessment. Nearby, Yi Shiwen and Yi Ruxue, his 2 siblings, stood quietly, and Zhang Yang, Wu Hao, and Qian Wanru were also present, making this a gathering of Qingfeng Mountain younger generation's top disciples. The news about Brother Ye's fight with Wen Shiyang has spread everywhere. After knowing that Brother Yi has used creative concept of his blade technique, I'm afraid a lot of people won't be able to sleep now. Now they won't dare to underestimate Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. Qian Wanru said in a very excited tone. Qingfeng Mountain was located in the remote areas of Great Yu State, and Qingfeng Mountain Subschool was always discriminated against by the schools from bigger districts. Yes, I'm afraid there are people who cannot sleep, and it seems that some are deliberately adding fuel to the fire. Yi Feng said with a sigh. This news had spread so fast, so wide, that it was clearly not the result of self-propagation and natural dissemination, and it was certain that people were adding fuel to the flames. I think people just want to stir the muddy water. Zhang Yang frowned and said, Someone wants us to become the target of public criticism, and they may join hands to destroy us. There's a possibility that you may be right. It is true that in the past our subschool had become friends with many subschools, but had also made a lot of enemies, and in a short time we will come to know the inside and outside of this matter. Yi Feng said, It doesn't matter if they're deliberately spreading the news or adding fuel to the flames. If we want to stand out during the coming assessment, we must be prepared to face all of this. Yi Shiwen said, It's quite simple. We will knock down anyone who tries to come in our way. Yi Zaiwen's discourse revealed self-confidence. He knew that any plots or conspiracies were nothing in face of a formidable strength and could only accomplish elimination and nothing else. Ha ha ha, right? What little brother said is absolutely right. We will overthrow any plots thrown at us, no matter which method they resort to. Yi Feng laughed and said, If someone wants to see what we are made up of, we will let them see enough. Our Qingfeng Mountain Subschool is not worse than any other school. Yi Shiwen said with a cold smile on his face. Yes, that's right. Yi Feng nodded, then turned to Yi Rushua and said, Now I am all right and can take care of myself, so you don't have to look after me anymore. Go! Use these few days left before the assessment to finish your closed-door training and try your best to break through to the Xiantian realm. At the time of assessment, we would be happy to have one more helper. Yi Rushua looked at Yi Feng, then nodded and said, Okay. She also knew that if she did not break into the Xiantian realm, then she won't be of any help to them. She still had the Xiantian pellet, gifted to her by Yi Shiwen, and breaking into the Xiantian realm was now much easier for her than others. Without a Xiantian pellet, even in the environment of main sect, breaking through to the Xiantian realm would still take a lot of time and effort. Both Wu Hao and Qian Wanru were somewhat enviously looking at Yi Rushua, but unfortunately they did not have a Xiantian pellet, and it would take them some time before they finally enter into the Xiantian realm. Then, abruptly, a disciple of the Qingfeng Mountain Subschool hastily ran inside the courtyard and said, It's bad! A person has come outside to challenge Brother Yi. As expected, they really came. Yi Feng said, So fast! Zhang Yang frowned and said, I'll go and take a look. Yi Shiwen said. Yi Shiwen went out of the courtyard and was surprised to find a white-robed youth coldly looking at him. This tall and sturdy young man's eyes had a faint qi, which burst out and splashed in all directions. He was exuding an ice-cold chill aura, which appeared to be coming out from the glaciers. When Yi Shiwen glanced at him, the youth seemed as if his whole body was frozen, just like a man made up of ice. Correction in Chapter 62. I noticed a typo where I had written Yi Rushua was 2 years older than Yi Shiwen, which was a typo, and it actually should be Yi Rushua was 20 years old and 1 year older than Yi Shiwen. Thanks to Slowy for bringing this to my notice. Laughing face. Friday. Since Q didn't clear for sponsored Chapter 84 in time, so it will come as a regular release on Friday. Good night. Raised so far. $35, 116%. Q is cleared for Chapter 85, 100%. Q status for Chapter 86, 16%. Chapter 84. NT. This chapter is a regular release. Also, I announce the grand release of minimum 6 sponsored chapters, which may go up to 8 releases. These chapters will be released on Saturday and rest on Sunday, excluding 1 regular release on Sunday, depending on donations and my schedule. I decided to organize this grand release to compensate for the lost sponsored chapters this week. Let's see if I can reach my target of releasing up to Chapter 93 by Sunday. Chapter 84. The 3 major subschools, the disciples from many subschools, had gathered around to watch this fight, and disciples from other mountain peaks had also arrived because Yi Zaiwen's fame had attracted them here, and these disciples were very interested to take a look at the strongest disciple of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, who had recently got the limelight. Yi Shiwen looked at the challenger and said, "Are you going to challenge me?" "Certainly." The man said, "Who are you?" Yi Shiwen asked, "Bingdao Subschool's Chu Sun." The man replied, "NT." Bingdao means Iceland, Bingdao, so he was actually the disciple of Bingdao Subschool. No wonder. On the east coastline of the Great Yu State, near the sea, there were some subschools, but Bingdao was one of the most famous ones because the disciples there practiced ice attribute power techniques. Ages ago, the forefathers had set up this system, as there was a world of ice and snow in 300 miles radius of the seacoast, and was the best environment for practicing ice attribute techniques. The disciples who passed out from the Bingdao subschool were always very powerful. Subschools could be divided into strong or weak categories, and Qingfeng Mountain Subschool was one of the relatively weak. But on the contrary, Bingdao Subschool had always been known as one of the 3 major subschools. In the crowd of subschools, Bingdao Subschool's strength was ranked among the best. Chu Sun, he is Bingdao's Chu Sun. No wonder his strength seems so formidable. A disciple exclaimed, "So he is, no wonder, excluding those 3 invincible masters. Chu Sun can be considered as one of the strongest." "You are Chu Sun," Yi Shiwen said, after staying here for more than a day. It was not that Yi Shiwen did not know anything, and he had certainly been informed about the outstanding disciples of various strong subschools. This term's batch of subschool disciples was the strongest batch known for centuries, as if strong masters had literally reigned on the main sect. And the top 3 players among them were definitely the most outstanding disciples of the 3 subschools. In the past, the disciples of these 3 major subschools were the strongest, and therefore they had obtained the most resources compared to other subschools and cultivated stronger disciples for the next term. With a repetition of this cycle, over time, these 3 subschools had gradually become the most formidable subschools with their strengths and resources far above other subschools. It could be said that, like always, all of the disciples of this session of the 3 major subschools were already in the Xiantian realm, and not only that, not a single Hotian realm disciples would be attending the assessment from these subschools. When Yi Shiwen heard this news, he could not help but held his breath in astonishment. All were Xiantian masters. What kind of ridiculous situation was this? It was said that these major subschools would put great and costly efforts to cultivate strong Xiantian disciples. And if the 3 major subschools would send more and more Xiantian disciples, then the other subschools had to spend as well on their outstanding disciples, although they never expected to be better than the other 3 major subschools. But at least their own disciples wouldn't be easily bullied by the disciples of the 3 subschools. But because the Qingfeng Mountain Yuan School was situated far away in the remote regions of Great Yu State, they obtained the news very late. No one knew how strong the 3 invincible masters actually were, because no one had forced them to use the full strength. But the hierarchy of the disciples was well known to everyone, in which experts like Chu Sun held higher position compared to Wen Shiyang and others. In fact, Chu Sun was a lot stronger than Wen Shiyang. "I hear that you claim to be the strongest subschool disciple, so I have personally come to teach you a lesson, so that you know the immensity of heaven and earth." Chu Sun coldly said. Certainly, it was not Yi Shiwen who had claimed to be the strongest disciple, but someone with ulterior motives, and they naturally didn't have good intentions for Qingfeng Mountain Subschool and its disciples. Whether I am the strongest disciple or not is none of your business, and you actually came to lecture me for this. Don't you have anything better to do? Yi Shiwen sneered and said, anyways, this Chu Sun was really too arrogant. Just because he heard Yi Zaiwen's name as the strongest disciple, he actually came to teach him a lesson? Does he really think that Yi Shiwen would just stand there and take his punches? You are courting death. Chu Sun had become furious. Who was he? He was a top disciple of Bingdao Sub-School, one of 3 major sub-schools, but Yi Shiwen had dared to talk disrespectfully with him. Today I will cripple you and turn you into a pile of bones. Depends on you. Yi Shiwen repeatedly sneered. Chu Sun's figure suddenly flashed, and his Zhen Qi suddenly released out of his body. The ambient temperature of the surroundings steeply plunged, as if sucked into the world of ice and snow. Huge and ice-cold Jin Qi aura had instantly turned the entire surrounding pure white, and the ferocious power of Chu Sun, which was far above Wen Shuyang, had properly displayed itself in front of everyone with his 40% transformed Xiantian Jin Qi surging majestically high into the sky. After breaking through to the Xiantian first stage, ordinary masters possessed 10% transformed Xiantian Jin Qi, and only after transforming 20% of their Xiantian Jin Qi, they could reach the peak of Xiantian first stage. Similarly, after reaching the Xiantian second stage, those with 30% transformed Xiantian Jin Qi were considered ordinary third-stage masters, and only after transforming 40% Xiantian Jin Qi, they could reach the peak of Xiantian second stage. Chu Sun was at the peak of Xiantian second stage, and compared to an average expert, he was extremely powerful. Chu Sun shot his palm with a snow-white Jin Qi wrapped on his arms, resembling a pure white crystal which was unusually beautiful, but incredibly dangerous. His palm viciously shot and directly froze the surrounding air while producing a crackling sound. When Yi Shiwen saw Chu Sun's palm approaching towards him, in an instant Yi Shiwen moved his hands and shot him palms, covered in a terrifying Jin Qi, which directly moved forward towards the incoming attack. Bang! 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 Their fight immediately approached the acme, and in an instant, a dozen blows had been exchanged between the toe. Chu Sun was amazed, as he never thought that Yi Shiwen would be able to block his moves so easily. As one of the top disciples in Bingdao Sub-School, although he was not the strongest, but he was still ranked among the top 5, but even so, he actually couldn't press down Yi Shiwen even after exchanging so many blows. He originally thought of Yi Shiwen as a boy who was boasting around after a little success, claiming to be the strongest disciple. But he never imagined that this boastful boy would actually be so strong. After coming to the main sect, many disciples bragged about themselves, but in Chu Sun's view, they were nothing but clowns. Even his big brother had never said that he was the strongest disciple. Then how could this man act recklessly and claim himself as the strongest disciple? He was in a bad mood and had come to vent his anger on Yi Shiwen, but he never thought that fighting Yi Shiwen would be like kicking an iron wall. Could it be that you are only at this level? Yi Shiwen sneered and said, raised so far, $300, 1,000%. Q is cleared for sponsored chapters 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, and 94. Thanks to Zachary Paul, U.S., Shauna Avila, U.S., Anonymous, Doha, and Sai Puklupta, UK, for sponsoring Chapter 85. Thanks to Amarija Andrews, U.S., and Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 86. Thanks again to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapters 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, and 92. Thanks to Jeffrey Demonier, France, for sponsoring Chapter 93. Thanks to Thomas Metzger, U.S., and Corey Sagawa, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 94. Chapter 85. NT. I start the Saturday's grand release with this chapter. Thanks to Zachary Paul, U.S., Shauna Avila, U.S., Anonymous, Doha, and Sai Puklupta, UK, for sponsoring Chapter 85. Chapter 85. The difference of 10. Could it be that you are only at this level? Yi Shiwen sneered and said. Yi Shiwen shot his palms with a shabu thunder-like rumbling sound, and this set of palm method in his hands could be considered superb. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's palm shot, and Chu Sun raised his hand to block. Suddenly, with a loud noise, a great force transmitted into the arms of Chu Sun, which numbed from the shock. Chu Sun's ice-cold jin, qi, instantly covered all over his arms, suddenly covering with a burst of coldness, and expelled the numbing feeling from his arms. He was extremely shocked in his heart. How could this man's strength reach such dreadful proportions? Whether it was Hua Cheng or Wen Shiyang, the strengths of both of them were far worse than the strength of Yi Shiwen, so they never had a chance against Yi Shiwen, also when they couldn't even force him to use his full force. In Yi Zaiwen's fight with those two, he had easily defeated them in not more than a single strike that had directly broken all the bones in their bodies, causing them to lose consciousness immediately. The fight had finished so fast that the spectators did not get enough time to feel the real, terrifying strength of Yi Shiwen. Anyway, no matter how much force he had used, they would have fainted instantly. But Chu Sun was different, and even if Yi Zaiwen's combat strength was equivalent to the ordinary masters of Xiantian third stage, but Chu Sun's strength was also close to the Xiantian third stage, though a bit less, and that was the reason why he had not directly fainted in one move from Yi Shiwen. But also because of this, everyone had got a chance to witness Yi Zaiwen's terrifying strength of 19 dragons that had totally overwhelmed Chu Sun's strength of 9 dragons. Chu Sun was facing a master who possessed the strength more than twice his own strength. Transformed 10% Xiantian Jin, Qi, granted the strength of 1 dragon. 20% transformed Xiantian Jin, Qi, granted the strength of 2 dragons. But after transforming 30% Xiantian Jin Qi, one could reach the strength of 5 dragons. After transforming 40% Xiantian Jin Qi and reaching the peak of Xiantian's second stage, Chu Sun's strength had reached the peak strength of 9 dragons. Once he would break through to the Xiantian third stage after transforming 50% Xiantian Jin Qi, his strength would further reach the strength of 10 dragons, which was still lower than Yi Zaiwen's current strength. After transforming 60% Xiantian Jin Qi and reaching the peak of Xiantian third stage, one could gain the strength ranging from the strength of 20 dragons to 49 dragons. Since Yi Shiwen was already at the peak of 50% transformed Xiantian Jin Qi and had reached the strength of 19 dragons, which was more than twice Chu Sun's current strength, each of his blows contained a terrifying strength and was instantly numbing the arms of Chu Sun. Although, like always, Yi Shiwen had not beaten Chu Sun in one shot, but he had already put Chu Sun in a tough situation where he was secretly crying incessantly in his heart. He was constantly shouting in his heart that what kind of monster was Yi Shiwen. Just from taking a look at him, no one could make a guess that a master of Xiantian first stage could actually possess such a monstrous strength. Chu Sun noticed that Yi Shiwen was only using his palm technique, but with brute force contained in each shot, to actually force him into spending all his Jin Qi just for defense. Such monstrous strength, even if it was inferior to the 3 invincible masters, but it was still equivalent to one of the top underplayers. How could such a figure appear in a small sub-school like Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, located in the remote area of Great Yu State? But Chu Sun didn't get enough time to think about all that because of the relentless attacks of Yi Shiwen. It was clear that Yi Shiwen had thoroughly grabbed the upper hand in this battle, pass like thunder and move like the wind, lightning and thunder, ghostly thunder axe, leveling storm 4 strokes. These 4 moves of rushing thunder hand technique had been used by Yi Shiwen, as if they had been used by the god himself, with each of these moves containing tremendous strength, coming one after the other, almost with no pause, with perfection, producing thunder-like rumbling sound in between the moves, as if they contained the power of heavenly thunder. Chu Sun had been totally pressed down under Yi Zaiwen's non-stop strikes and was totally depressed. How could he not know about rushing thunder hand? This was a lower-level power technique taught in almost all sub-schools, and throughout the Great Estate, there were countless people who knew this technique, but no one had ever displayed this kind of might while using this technique. It was as if Yi Shiwen had fully assimilated the true essence of this technique and had displayed its ideal form in front of everyone. Even those elders could not be compared to Yi Shiwen when it came to mastery over power techniques. But for Chu Sen, the most depressing thing was that Yi Shiwen had used a lower-level power technique and displayed such a terrifying might that he had actually been completely pressed down and could only fight a defensive battle. After this, he would not be able to lift his head out of shame. When Chu Sun was a child, he had practiced a lower-level power technique for some time, but soon when his cultivation level had progressed, he had soon abandoned it for practicing an intermediate power technique, and now that he had already practiced advanced power techniques and Xiantian power techniques, he would never even think of using a lower-level power technique in battles. But right now, he was being defeated by a lower-level power technique. He never thought that lower-level techniques could actually gain such terrifying might, especially when wielded by Yi Shiwen. Bang! 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 The metal clashing sound spread each time Yi Shiwen and Chu Sun collided and exchanged moves. A terrifying battle between the two powerful Xiantian masters was sending blast waves everywhere in the surroundings. This is so incredible. I did not think that Yi Shiwen would actually be able to fight off Chu Sun without losing for such a long time. Lose? It is obvious that Chu Sun has been completely pushed down by Yi Shiwen, and his defeat is inevitable. A disciple laughed loudly and said, "Moreover, Yi Shiwen has not used his strongest technique yet. That day, I saw the true strength of his blade technique when Shuyang had lost in a single blade attack, but right now, Yi Shiwen has not drawn his blade, otherwise Chu Sun would not be able to withstand for so long. Wait until Yi Shiwen draws his blade, because then Chu Sun would not be able to play defensive like this." I never thought that this Yi Shiwen would actually be so powerful, and it seems that except for those 3 invincible experts, Yi Shiwen is definitely one of the top star-ranked disciples. Chu Sun's hands had gradually numbed with no way to relieve this numbness, even after using his Zhenqi. He was still unable to accept this turn of events in his heart. How could this be? Yi Shiwen had not even drawn his blade and was already so powerful. Was Yi Shiwen going to defeat him without even using his blade? How is this possible? There was a difference of strength of 10 dragons between the strengths of Chu Sun and Yi Shiwen. Although Chu Sun was using a superior power technique than Rushing Thunder Hand. But by virtue of the degree of mastery over Rushing Thunder Hand and the terrifying strength of 19 dragons, Yi Shiwen had completely pressed him down. But Chu Sun was still unwilling to accept this result where he might get defeated by a Xiantian first stage master like Yi Shiwen. Finally, Chu Sun's hands had completely numbed and he couldn't block the relentless attacks of Yi Shiwen and was sent flying out while screaming. Chapter 86 NT. Thanks to Amarija Andrews, U.S. and Suvin Chantha, U.S. for sponsoring Chapter 86. This is the second chapter of the Saturday's grand release. 3 more to come. Chapter 86. You all can come together. Everyone was shocked watching the scene, because no one was able to see the depth of Yi Zaiwen's true strength. The stronger his enemy was, the stronger he would become accordingly. Earlier, his battle with Hu Cheng and now with Chu Sun, each time, his strength would grow, which was very shocking for everyone. It was as if his strength was truly unfathomable. Yi Shiwen looked coldly at Chu Sun. Although this guy was conceited and very arrogant, but there was a valid reason behind his arrogance, as he was at the peak of Xiantian's second stage, and his strength was indeed sufficient enough to be ranked among the top row of the disciples. Yi Shiwen almost could not waste his cultivation, because just when he had shot his palm towards Chu Sun, his intention had been detected by Chu Sun, who then blocked Yi Zaiwen's palm and slightly deflected it. Yi Shiwen, accept our challenge. Yi Shiwen was still thinking about this matter when suddenly he heard 3 loud voices challenging him. Yi Shiwen looked up and actually saw that 3 similar wretched-looking, fat, people had jumped out of the crowd. Shameless! The three of you are taking advantage of him, who has just finished fighting a battle. These three are the infamous Zhongshe three brothers from Qingqing Sub-School. So they are the Zhongshe three brothers. Ah, no wonder they are too outrageous. After coming to the main sect, it didn't take long for the Zhongshe three brothers to gain quite a reputation. And of course, this reputation was not a good one. These three brothers were really shameless. Yi Shiwen also knew about the Zhongshe three brothers and could only sigh. So, do you dare to accept our challenge? The eldest of the three Zhongshe brothers challenged Yi Shiwen in a provocative manner. In spite of facing criticism from the crowd, three Zhongshe brothers were not willing to give up. Now that Yi Shiwen had already defeated Chu Sen, they were aiming at defeating the exhausted Yi Shiwen and gain instant fame. As to how shameless this act was, they didn't care. On the contrary, they were very complacent from this. They only considered it as their praise. Yes, if you don't want to accept our challenge, then simply throw in the towel and we will walk away. The second Zhong brother said in a provocative tone. Well, brother, I think he has got no guts. The youngest Zhong brother pretended to be cool and said, Shameless. Behind Yi Shiwen, Yi Rushue frowned and said, she was very mad at them as this act was no different from taking advantage of someone else. Initially, they did not dare to stand up on their own against Yi Shiwen, and now that he was exhausted after a battle, they were trying to provoke him by implying that he was a coward. In her view, it was really shameless. Other disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were also glaring and giving angry looks to the three brothers, because this was simply too outrageous. While other disciples of different sub-schools were also looking at the three brothers with a look of disdain in their eyes and were cursing them for this shameless act. All eyes were fixated on Yi Shiwen, waiting how he would answer. The stern-looking Yi Shiwen suddenly chuckled and said, You can certainly challenge me, and I am always ready to take on people like you any day. NT. Author has used a Mawa Go, which means any Tom, Dick, or Harry. What? You dare look down on us three brothers? The second brother said in an angry voice, If you want to challenge me, you will have to bet 100 spirit stones, and if lost, no money returns. Yi Shiwen indifferently said. When the three Zhongshe brothers heard this, they froze for a moment because they never expected that Yi Shiwen would actually put forward such a condition. One must know that 100 spirit stones was a big amount for an ordinary Xiantian master. But Zhongboss nodded and said, All right. In his view, as long as they beat Yi Shiwen, they would not lose anything. He didn't want to delay the fight even for 1 minute, because Yi Shiwen might recover from his exhaustion, which would naturally be very unfavorable to them. The three Zhongshe brothers immediately agreed to the terms of battle. These three brothers really were so shameless, but this time they had probably miscalculated by thinking that they could easily bully Yi Shiwen. All three of you can come together. Yi Shiwen said, What did you just say? The Zhong boss said, but since they did not have any sense of shame, they would of course take this chance to work together and defeat Yi Shiwen. Boom! The three Zhongshe brothers, with their huge statures and inconsistent speeds, instantly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. The overall strength of the three Zhongshe brothers was quite high, and they actually were the masters of Xiantian's second stage, and their boss had transformed 40% Xiantian Jinqi and was already at the peak of Xiantian's second stage, although he was not as strong as Chu Sen, but the difference between them was not very wide. All three of them together smacked their fists with their combined strength, actually somewhat stronger than that of Chu Sen. Many spectating disciples, without uttering a single word, were anxiously watching the fight. Bang! 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 Yi Zaiwen's arm instantly blurred and blocked their joint attack. Soon, they felt as if they had collided with an iron wall. They had originally expected that Yi Shiwen had already exhausted his Jinqi, because if they had teamed up to fight against Chu Sen, they would definitely have exhausted themselves. But from the appearance of Yi Shiwen, neither his complexion was red due to fatigue, nor did he look exhausted even after fighting a fierce battle with Chu Sen. This had made them to secretly complain in their hearts at their decision to fight Yi Shiwen. But Yi Shiwen did not give them any chance of respite. Bang! Yi Shiwen used his one hand to catch a punch from the youngest brother, followed by using another hand. He instantly punched him. Kara! With a crisp sound of breaking bones, the youngest Zong brother's hand was instantly broken by Yi Zaiwen's punch. Yi Shiwen then lifted one foot and shot a lightning-fast kick covered with a terrifying jinqi and shoved directly into the belly of the youngest brother. He screamed again, and his stout body was instantly sent flying out and severely fell on the ground, and he fainted. Third brother! The second Zong brother roared and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. But then he also walked on his brother's footsteps. Yi Shiwen severely blasted his palm on his chest, using the move Leveling Storm 4 strokes, which fractured his ribs, and he spat a mouthful of blood and fell upside down on the ground. When their boss saw that the two brothers had been blasted away by Yi Shiwen, he quickly shouted, "I will," but he couldn't finish the sentence, as in a flash, Yi Zaiwen's overwhelming punch blasted. Boom! Yi Zaiwen's punch blasted away the Zong boss, and his body severely hit on the side of a tree, and he fell unconscious. Chapter 87. NT. Thanks to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapters 87. This is the third chapter of Saturday's grand release. 2 more to come. Chapter 87, Yi Shiwen. Kamout Bingdao Sub-School's courtyard was located among the courtyards of the 3 major subcases. With an ice-cold look on his face, Chu Sun was standing outside, occasionally looking towards the room inside the courtyard. Beside him stood a blue-robed youth with a dignified appearance and smile on his face. He looked at Chu Sun and said, "I heard that you were defeated by a country bumpkin." Chu Sun shot a cold glance at him. This blue-robe youth was called Gong Yao, and like Chu Sun, he was also one of top disciples of Bingdao Sub-School, even stronger compared to him. Gee, this news has spread everywhere and has turned us into a laughingstock, and now people are laughing at our Bingdao Sub-School. Our reputation has been thoroughly discredited. Do you want to sell us? Gong Yao laughed and said, "This is not something you should joke about." Chu Sun said in a cold voice, "I will do something about it myself." "You can't do it yourself." Gong Yao smiled and said, "Because recently I've heard that in the last 3 days, 30 people challenged him and no one could defeat him." After Yi Shiwen had defeated Chu Sun and the 3 Zongsha brothers, soon a lot of disciples had been attracted to come and challenge Yi Shiwen, hoping to beat him and earning fame in the process. For now, do not look for any trouble with Yi Shiwen. At this time, the door opened and came out a man with an appearance of more than 20 years old and an ice-cold facial expression, even more than Chu Sun's usual cold look. He was wearing dark blue clothes, tall stature, and possessed an overbearing aura. Why? Chu Sun asked without trying to be disrespectful in front of that man, because he was strongest of this year's disciples from Bingdao Sub-School, Shangguan Shuani, with an unfathomable cultivation, and was ranked among the top 3 players from all the sub-schools. Assessment examination will be held in 2 days, so do not complicate the situation. Shangguan Shuani said in an indifferent voice, "Everyone's watching our actions, moreover. You may not be his match. Later, we will take our time and deal with him. Make a full preparation and perform outstandingly in the assessment. Understood?" "Yes." In just 3 days of harvest, Yi Zaiwen's inventory now had 3,000 spirit stones. All of a sudden, gaining this many spirit stones was simply unimaginable even for the masters of Xiantian 4th or 5th stage. Because Yi Shiwen had defeated Chu Sun and Zongsha 3 brothers, he had become part of many rumors, and his fame had become comparable to that of the well-known figures. Chu Sun was undoubtedly one of strongest top disciples of Bingdao Major Sub-School, and although the 3 Zongsha brothers were very shameless, but a lot of people could not help but admit that they were very powerful. Especially when the 3 of them fought together, their total strength would be more than that of common top disciples. Among the disciples of these sub-schools, there were some so-called seed disciples. These seed disciples were the strongest in every respect and existed in each social stratum of disciples. There were seed disciples present among the outer disciples, inner disciples, and core disciples as well. Seed disciples were the most formidable group of people, and the sub-schools would cultivate these seed disciples. Chu Sun and Zongshi, three brothers, were also the seed disciples. Yi Shiwen had previously defeated Wen Shiyang, but he was only a quasi-seed disciple, so defeating him was nothing compared to defeating Chun Sun and Zongshi brothers. There were countless famous disciples who wanted to challenge Yi Shiwen, but how could Yi Shiwen just accept so many challenges? So Yi Shiwen had set some rules. If they wanted to challenge him, they must hand over 100 spirit stones, otherwise they won't get a chance to fight him. Also, each day he would accept challenges from not more than 10 people. This would directly eliminate those who just wanted to be famous but had no strength or money to challenge. So in just 3 days, Yi Zaiwen's total stock of spirit stones had suddenly gone up to more than 3,000 spirit stones. One could say that Yi Shiwen had suddenly become rich because even for a seed disciple like Chu Sun and other seeds disciples, 100 spirit stones were close to their net worth. Not to mention, for the ordinary disciples, especially those who had just entered into the Xiantian realm, having 10 spirit stones was not bad. Among the challengers during this period, there were some seeds disciples as well, some of whom were even more powerful than Chu Sun, and it was very tough for Yi Shiwen to defeat them. But Yi Shiwen had a great harvest because these seeds disciples were very powerful, with each having his own trump skill, and it was very difficult to deal with each of them, which was again a major harvest for Yi Zaiwen's battle experience. And after fighting with these strong people, Yi Zaiwen's various martial arts had been greatly tempered, and he had become even more skilled at using them in fights. Now, everyone was aware of the fact that in the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, there was such an outstanding figure. Yi Shiwen naturally had gained a rank among the top seed disciples, and almost everyone among the sub-school disciples had recognized his terrifying monstrous strength. Even if they hated it, they had to admit it. Yi Shiwen had been able to feel a huge power surging in his body, and he felt as if he was standing on the threshold of a breakthrough, which could happen at any time, and then he would finally break through to next stage and become a Xiantian second stage master. Once he entered into the Xiantian second stage, his strength would immediately have a rapid progress, and by that time, he would be able to contend with the elite masters, who were at the peak of Xiantian third stage and possessed 60% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. Now, Yi Shiwen had enough spirit stones to support him through his breakthrough without any problem. So long as there were enough spirit stones, having a breakthrough would never be difficult for him. After entering into the main sect, the competition pressure had become greater. Boom! A majestic aura suddenly burst out in the courtyard of the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and quickly spread in the surrounding area. It was a breakthrough into the Xiantian realm. There was a look of surprise on Yi Zaiwen's face, because this time the only person in the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School who could have a breakthrough into the Xiantian realm was his sister, Yi Rushua. While Yi Shiwen was playing around outside with the challengers, Yi Rushua had decided not to come out until her closed-door training would finish, and she would break into the Xiantian realm. Yi Shiwen was about to rush inside the courtyard and congratulate Yi Rushua, when suddenly a hoarse roar resounded throughout the sky. Yi Shiwen, come out! Chapter 88 NT. Thanks to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 88. This is the 4th chapter of Saturday's grand release. One more to come. Chapter 88. Xiaoyang elder Yi Shiwen was about to rush inside the courtyard and congratulate Yi Rushua, when suddenly a hoarse roar resounded throughout the sky. Yi Shiwen, come out! The roar was instantly followed by a terrifying coercive aura which pressed down toward the courtyard. This pressure was so terrifying and sudden that it took Yi Shiwen by surprise and overwhelmed him. Who? Yi Shiwen shouted along with his Xiantianjin Qi rolling out to confront that coercive aura. The collision between both of their Jinqi directly produced a windstorm. But it was obvious that Yi Zaiwen's Xiantianjin Qi was not a match for the incredible Jinqi released by the other party, which came down all the way and completely crushed Yi Zaiwen's Jinqi. Xiantian Zhenyuan! An astonished look flashed in Yi Zaiwen's eyes, because this visitor was definitely not one of the disciples who had come to challenge him, as only the masters of Xiantian 6th stage or above could possess Xiantian Jinyuan. When a Xiantian master would reach the peak of the Xiantian 5th stage, he would have transformed 100% of his Houtian Jinqi into Xiantian Jinqi. At that time, if he would want to break into the Xiantian 6th stage, then it would occur only after metamorphosis, when the Xiantian Jinqi would start transforming into Xiantian Jinyuan, which was considered the second metamorphosis of life. Once the transformation was successful, the life expectancy from the original 200 years would also increase to more than 500 years. Xiantian 6th stage masters were a lot more powerful compared to the masters of Xiantian 5th stage, and only 1 in a dozen was able to have a qualitative change in their Jinqi, which was necessary to step into the Xiantian 6th stage. Yuan School main sect also classified this as a standard of division, where masters of Xiantian 6th stage or above could become core disciples, and those below 6th stage could only become inner disciples. Although the difference was of only a single stage, but there was a difference of heaven and earth between the treatments of masters on these stages. Most of the elders were masters of Xiantian 6th stage, who were originally the core disciples, with many of them reaching the deadline age of nearly 500 years, trying to break through to the Zhendao realm. Since these core disciples had been unable to reach Zhendao realm, so they had decided to become elders for the sub-schools. But even so, all these elders were scary existences and were far stronger than ordinary disciples. "Who are you?" Yi Shiwen came out of the courtyard and was surprised to find an old man, clad in black clothes, glaring angrily at him. Right at that time, Zhangyang, Yi Feng, and Yi Ruxiue, who had just broken through to the Xiantian realm, had all come out as well. "Are you Yi Shiwen?" the old man asked in a cold voice with an angry look on his face. "I am," Yi Shiwen said. "You little beast, you dared to injure the seed disciples of our Shaoyang sub-school." The black-clothed old man said in a cold voice, "Who are you calling little beast?" Yi Shiwen asked. "Damn you, you little bastard!" that black-clothed old man blurted out with his face flushed red with anger. "Ha ha ha!" The disciples of the Qingfeng Mountain sub-school gave out an unbridled laughter. They had quickly understood that this black-clothed old man was an elder of Shaoyang sub-school. Even if he was an elder, but he belonged to the side of their sworn enemy, which was not going to change at this point of time, as the enmity between the two sides had extended for so many years. The elder was certainly furious because Yi Shiwen had severely injured Huicheng, and there was no way for them to participate in the assessment. That was the reason why he had come to punish Yi Shiwen. "You little beast, I will kill you." The black-clothed old man angrily tossed his sleeves, and suddenly the air around him completely distorted. A big hand instantly congealed in the air, made up of the Xiantian Jinyuan, and for a master of Xiantian 6th stage, this method of directly using the Xiantian Jinyuan was very useful. Clang! Yi Shiwen took out the long blade from the scabbard on his back and released a bright blade light which instantly filled the sky. At the moment, the appearance of Yi Shiwen was shining like a god of war, with a solemn look on his face and his black hair swinging violently in the wind. The sword light completely transformed into a sharp blade made up of condensed Xiantian Jinqi, which immediately rushed towards that big hand and chopped down. Zizi zizi! The tip of the blade chopped down on the big hand, issuing a loud zizi zizi sound, followed by evolving the live picture of the creative concept of Missing Moon Beheader. As the creative concept of Missing Moon Beheader evolved out, it temporarily blocked the big hand by continuously regrouping the Xiantian Jinqi and chopping down again and again on the big hand. Creative concept. How is this possible? He has actually evolved out a creative concept. The black clothed old man looked unbelievably at Yi Shiwen because he could not believe that Yi Shiwen had already evolved out a creative concept, which was difficult to obtain, even for the inner disciples of the main sect. But even so, if he was not such an evildoer, then how could he have easily beaten the geniuses of his sub-school? Having thought of this, his eyes flashed with a killing intent. Such an evildoer genius. It was necessary to strangle him before he became hostile towards his sub-school. And if allowed to grow up, it would certainly not be a good thing for Xiaoyang sub-school. Even if this time he might put his Xiaoyang sub-school in the danger of getting punished, he must strangle the danger in the cradle. In the sky, a descending moon intensely collided with the big hand, which caused terrifying air explosions, sending layer by layer ripples of air waves in all directions. The pressure was increasing on Yi Zaiwen's body, while his blade had fiercely collided with the big hand, but even after displaying the full essence of the creative concept of his blade technique, he had still been unable to block the incoming attack. Yi Shiwen had been forced down by the virtue of superior strength of the old man. Yi Shiwen was soon pressed down, and his bones started to make crackling sound. His skeleton was facing an intense friction, although his body was insanely tough, just as strong as the steel, but when put under such a kind of terrifying coercion, it seemed as if his body would explode any time. "Old man, what are you doing?" Yi Shiwen gritted his teeth and shouted in a voice filled with anger. This old guy was definitely not holding back, and it seemed as if he was going to kill Yi Shiwen right there, right then. That black-clothed simply ignored Yi Shiwen, and his big hand pressed down while fully destroying the live picture of creative concept. "Old man, in the future, I will certainly return the favor for today." Yi Shiwen gritted his teeth and said with a lot of sweat crazily dripping down his face. In just 10 years, he would be able to easily crush this old guy, but right now his strength was not enough. This was the first time that Yi Shiwen had thoroughly felt so helpless, craving for strength. He just needed enough strength so that a day like this would never come again where he would feel so helpless. Chapter 89. NT. Thanks to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring chapters 89. This is the 5th and final chapter of Saturday's grand release. With this, I conclude Saturday's grand release. Look forward to one more grand release on Sunday. Enjoy. Chapter 89. Mighty Lin Zhantian. Old man, in the future, I will certainly return the favor for today. Yi Shiwen gritted his teeth and said with a lot of sweat crazily dipping down his face, "You do not have a future." The old man shouted with a hideous look on his face. "Stop!" A loud shout came, followed by a big hand that came straight down from the sky and caught that old man's big hand and directly exploded it. "What were you trying to do?" A thundering voice resounded in the sky, and a figure came down flying. This was none other than Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School's former ancestor, Lin Zhantian. The black-clothed old man looked coldly at Lin Zhantian. "This little beast has severely injured the seed disciples of our Xiaoyang Sub-School, and there's no way for our school to participate in the assessment. This hatred is totally irreconcilable." That old man said and gritted his teeth. "Bullshit!" Yi Shiwen gasped for breath, then said, "It was them who first came to bully the disciples of our sub-school and were forcefully trying to occupy our courtyard. They even injured my brother and were going to cripple him. They went too far, and I was just returning the favor, but I was merciful and did not waste their martial arts." "Little bastard, you!" the black-clothed old man cursed, but it was not that he did not know the ins and outs of whole matter. He was just trying to take advantage of the fact that Lin Zhantian had not come back yet, and this was the best opportunity to take revenge on Yi Shiwen and settle things once and for all. But things didn't go as he had planned after the intervention of Lin Zhantian. "Get out of here!" Lin Zhantian thundered loudly and waved his big sleeves. Almost instantly, a terrifying force arrived in front of the black-clothed old man. Poof! The black-clothed old man spurted out a mouthful of blood, and his skinny body was sent flying upside down. Only one hit had seriously injured him, and he was stunned, staring at the Lin Zhantian because he never thought that Lin Zhantian could actually be so strong. "Zhan Dao," black-clothed old man muttered while glaring at Lin Zhantian with his fierce eyes. He said, "Lin Zhantian, you'll regret it. Get lost. No one dares to touch my disciples." Lin Zhantian said in a strong voice. He had clearly demonstrated the strength of the Zhen Dao. The disciples of the Zhen Dao realm were called true disciples. Compared to them, the core disciples could only be considered mid-level personnel, but true disciples were considered at the top. In a major sect like Yi Yuan School main sect, only few hundred true disciples were present, but the added count of core disciples and inner disciples together was almost 100,000. The gap between the positions of these two parties could be seen just from the numbers. The black-clothed old man looked bitterly at Lin Zhantian. No doubt, if they were not in the premises of the main sect, he would have been directly beheaded by Lin Zhantian. The competition among the sub-schools was allowed as long as there were no direct fights between the factions. From the perspective of the main sect, as long as the whole martial arts community was flourishing inside the school, competition was permitted. The black-clothed old man looked towards the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and bitterly left. "Let's go inside," Lin Zhantian said. After the return of Lin Zhantian, it seemed as if the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School had suddenly gained back its backbone, and the disciples followed him inside, happy expressions on their faces. After hearing about all the events that had occurred during his absence, Lin Zhantian smiled and looked at Yixuan, then said, "Good, well done. You are the power and prestige of our Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School." Lin Zhantian was also surprised in his heart because this was quite unexpected, although he had always been very optimistic about Yixuan, but did not expect that he would actually be able to become so strong that not even the seed disciples would be his match. Those seed disciples were considered elite among the elites and were generally very powerful, but had been surprisingly defeated by Yixuan. Lin Zhantian was overjoyed with these turn of events. "In my absence, all of you have done very well," Lin Zhantian said. "Thanks, Ancestor, for your praise," everyone said in unison. "Now, I will tell you about the reason behind the sudden departure of all the elders, although this is a major affair, but I think it is necessary for all of you to know about it." Lin Zhantian said. The looks of all the disciples suddenly became serious because they knew that a matter which was major for Lin Zhantian could never be trivial. This thing is slightly strange. For the triennial assessment examination, all of the sub-schools send their respective elite disciples, but this time actually disciples of more than 30 sub-schools were attacked, out of which disciples from 6 sub-schools were completely annihilated and not even their skeletons could be found. Lin Zhantian said with a solemn look on his face. Everyone present there held their breaths, though these sub-schools were just Yi Yuan School sub-schools and relative to the main sect. Their strength was not much, but compared to other sects, it was still very large. But these were the elite disciples of various sub-schools, not to mention they were also being accompanied by a few elders, and these elders were super experts of Xiantian 5th stage or more. How could they dare to touch such a team? But to be able to completely annihilate such a team of experts, this was not possible for ordinary forces. In the past, there have been cases when disciples were attacked, but they were all isolated phenomenon or vendetta. But this time it is not unusual that out of a total of over 100 sub-schools, more than 30 sub-schools have been attacked. Lin Zhantian said, "This thing has caused the sect to have a high degree of attention to this matter because there may be large, hostile forces after our disciples. The sect has sent many experts to investigate about this matter. The reason of sharing this thing with you is because soon you will enter the main sect. After that, you need to be very careful." Lin Zhantian said, participating in the assessment was especially important for sub-schools because it would get easier for their disciples to be directly promoted to become the inner disciples or core disciples in the main sect. Naturally, those who performed outstandingly in the assessment would get more popular and would be able to get more resources for their respective sub-schools. This was the reason why the elder of Shaoyang sub-school was so frantic. Yes. Everyone said in unison. Sunday, I announced the grand release of 3 to 5 sponsored chapters on Sunday. I decided to organize this grand release to compensate for the lost sponsored chapters this week. Let's see if I can reach my target of releasing up to chapter 93 by Sunday. Monday. Any sponsored chapters one couldn't release on Sunday will come on Monday along with Sunday's regular chapter 95 and Monday's regular chapter 96 raised so far. $150, 500%. Queue is cleared for sponsored chapters 90, 91, 92, 93, and 94. Thanks again to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring chapters 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, and 92. Thanks to Jeffrey Dementier, France, for sponsoring chapter 93. Thanks to Thomas Metzger, U.S., and Corey Segawa, U.S., for sponsoring chapter 94. Chapter 90. NT. Damn, I don't think I will be able to reach my target of releasing up to chapter 93 by Sunday. Stuff came up and I was a lot busier today. So today's grand release will contain only chapters 90, 91, and 92. You will get yet another grand release of chapters 93, 94, 95, and 96 on Monday. And after that, one more grand release on Tuesday of sponsored chapters 97, 98, 99, and 100. I don't plan to stop these grand releases until I release chapter 100. Enjoy! NT. Thanks to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring chapter 90. Chapter 90. Assessment begins. Lin Jiantian undoubtedly had cast a shadow of an unknown enemy in the hearts of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, but they were not too worried about it. After all, they were too keen to enter into the main sect. Everyone's thoughts were fully focused on the assessment examination, which was going to take place a few days later, although it was not supposed to be difficult, and basically everyone could pass. But this assessment was directly related to their future treatments and positions in the sect. Those who performed outstandingly could earn a lot of rewards. Yi Xuan was only a little worried in his heart about the future. After all, there were some powerful hostile forces lurking out there. So all of them needed to be careful in future. But he didn't think about this matter for too long because it was a thing in the future. And right now, the most important matter was to perform well in the assessment. Time passed day by day, and 3 days had quickly passed. It was time to finally participate in the assessment examination. Early in the morning, all of the Qingfeng Mountain's disciples got up early and assembled in the courtyard entrance. Lin Jiantian looked at the crowd and said, "Today we're going to the Full Moon Peak." Full Moon Peak was one of the 10 main peaks of Yi Yuan School and was home to the leaders of the Vane disciples who were the direct descendants of Yi Yuan School's inheritance and held the direct command over the doctrines of the school. For ages, these leaders would generally come from the Full Moon Peak. Everyone was excited because they all wanted to be able to join the Full Moon Peak, as the disciples of Full Moon Peak were considered as the most noble and honorable. But whether they would be able to enter into the Full Moon Peak depended on their performance during the assessment examination. This assessment will be conducted on the Full Moon Peak. Lin Jiantian said, "The ancient masters of the Yi Yuan School came forth in large numbers to create many small worlds. This time we are going to a small world located on the Full Moon Peak called Huanma Territory. This small world was created when an ancestor from previous generations of Yi Yuan School used his extraordinary magical powers to open the many spaces from the devil world and captured a lot of Huanma, and again used his magical powers to open up this small world. Huanma was a low-level devil and was good at using magic to confuse the people, but even if it was at the lowest level among the devils, but also very tough. Yi Xuan had read about them in some records, but in those records, Devil World was treated just as a kind of myth and looked like an ancient mythology, but here he actually heard that devils were real. Although it's only a small world, but it is 100 times larger than our Qingfeng Mountain Subschool's Blood Yuan territory. Lin Jiantian said here, the danger is also higher, but this small world's most important characteristic is its transformation between real and imaginary world. Even if someone dies inside this world, he wouldn't actually die and will be sent out immediately. But the things you all will see inside are deemed to be true, other than this feature of no one dying inside this world. The rest is similar to other small worlds. The disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were in uproar, because if that was the case, then they really did not need to worry. They could just go all out. But at the same time, the competition would become more intense, because everyone would have no scruples, as they knew that they wouldn't die no matter what. This is a protective measure to protect the newly arrived disciples. Lin Zhantian said, "But you shouldn't think that you will not die. Those Huanma are not humans, and they are very good at mind control magic. Some people got their minds controlled by Huanma, and those creatures attach themselves onto the body of these people, and they have since become their puppets." All of the disciples trembled in fear, because if that was the case, then it was really too scary. People could become zombies after being controlled by those Huanma, and after that, even if they survived, it would be worse than death. In the past, such a thing has happened when some of the disciples were being controlled and no one knew about it, and it had nearly caused a calamity. I am telling all of this to remind you to always pay attention to your surroundings and be careful at all times. Lin Zhantian said, "The assessment requirements are very simple. So long as each of you kills one Huanma, you can pass." Lin Zhantian said, "This assessment will be observed by many high-level personnel of the sect. So if you give a splendid performance, then you may get directly chosen by them in their veins. Therefore, do your best and perform well." "We promise," the disciples said in unison. Although even the weakest Huanma was at the Hotian 9th stage, but these disciples were all at the Hotian 9th stage or above and could easily handle a low-level devil like Huanma. Huanma were more formidable in the spiritual influence and mind control. Especially those with weak minds were most vulnerable. But these were the elite disciples with strong minds, otherwise how could they have gained a high-level cultivation at such a young age? So, as long as they were careful, it would not be too difficult to deal with Huanma. So, all of the disciples were confident because anyway they won't die and could display their full strengths. Unless they had an extreme bad luck, there won't be any other problems. Lin Zhantian called several demon birds, and everyone jumped up. In total, there were 20 or so individuals participating from the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. You won't die during this assessment, but I hope that you will still be very cautious. This assessment is not too difficult, but the emphasis doesn't lie on just passing the examination, but in getting better results. If you fail abruptly, then it is equivalent to missing a golden opportunity, understood? Lin Zhantian did not forget to teach them even from over the demon bird. Yes. The disciples nodded and said, "Even after entering the main sect, you will still always be the vain disciples of my Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. The seal of Qingfeng Mountain has been long branded on your persona, so I hope you will have heartfelt solidarity, and you will also show your support in the future." Lin Zhantian. From among these disciples, those who would become famous would also become a huge support for the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School in the future. Yes, the disciples said in unison. While everyone was excited and gossiping about the assessment, the demon birds had already flown over several mountains to enter into the outer boundaries of Yiyuan School. The inside of the Yiyuan School was very lively and bustling with people, and there was actually a city located in the hillside of the mountain peaks, showing the liveliness of Yiyuan School's main sect. Chapter 91. NT? I am still working on Chapter 92, so for now, enjoy reading Chapter 91 Grinning Face, thanks to Suvin Chantha, U.S., for sponsoring Chapter 91, Chapter 91, The Gathering of Geniuses Within the Premises of Yiyuan School Main Sect. One could see demon birds flying everywhere, carrying the disciples. The crowd of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School responded with curiosity in their eyes, looking excitingly at this scene. But soon, the demon birds flew towards the foot of the full moon mountain peak. Only the elders and true disciples were allowed to fly over the full moon peak, and others could only go up from the foot of the mountain. Lin Zhantian did not go with them, but directly jumped off from his demon bird and vanished in front of everyone. Everyone went towards the plaza of Full Moon Peak, where disciples from over 100 sub-schools were arriving one after another. Over 100 sub-schools, even if each sub-school had only a few dozens of people. But after adding them up, the total number would go up to thousands of people. The good thing was that the plaza was very wide, and at the moment it was filled with many shadows. These were the masters of the Hotian ninth stage, who were once the core disciples of their respective sub-schools. This gathering was truly magnificent and spectacular, far more than the gathering of competitions held at various sub-schools. And, of course, compared to the geniuses present in the gathering for the competitions, the quality of talent here was undoubtedly much higher. Each of these sub-schools had elite disciples, and all of them had dignified appearance, especially the Xiantian level disciples. All of them were upright and very conceited. After all, they had already entered into the Xiantian realm before joining the main sect. To be able to become a Xiantian master was an incredible achievement for the sub-school disciples, and they were considered elite among the elites. Yi Rushiwe was the latest addition to the group of Xiantian masters of the Qingfeng Mountain sub-schools. Including her, now there were a total of 4 Xiantian masters, which was an unforeseen achievement in the history of Qingfeng Mountain sub-school. Although there were a lot of strong opponents with many strong sub-schools, but some sub-schools were quite miserable with only a single Xiantian master. With over 100 sub-schools arrived for the assessment, the strength of each sub-schools was not the same. The strength of some was almost comparable to the 3 major sub-schools. It's truly spectacular. Wu Hao sighed with emotion and said, now these disciples had truly realized that their own road to practice in the main sect was finally going to begin, and that there were several stronger people in the world. This scenery was going to encourage their unceasing progress. At this time, Yi Shiwen saw the people of 3 major sub-schools standing in front. Standing on the left were the people of Bingdao sub-school, led by a man with an extraordinary temperament. Yi Shiwen did not know, but this guy was the well-known Shangguan Xuani, one of the strongest 3 disciples of this year, with an unfathomable strength. Next to the group of Bingdao sub-school was also a large group of people with each one of their disciples in the Xiantian realm. The group belonged to one of the 3 major sub-schools, Shen Huishan sub-school. It was located in the southern part of the state, next to a volcano, and its disciples practiced fire attribute power techniques, making them a stark contrast with the disciples of Bingdao sub-school. And Shanhuashan sub-school can also be called Divine Volcano sub-school. These 2 sub-schools had always been consistent rivals, thanks to their ranks as one of the major sub-schools and also the opposing nature of their power techniques. In short, these 2 sub-schools were inherently hostile towards each other and also held mutual hatred. In front of the group of Divine Volcano sub-school, there was a man standing proudly with an appearance of approximately 25-year-old. He was an abnormally burly man, and Yi Shiwen found out that this man was named Yan Qiliang. Similar to Shangguan Xuani, he also had an unfathomable strength. On the other side of the group of Divine Volcano sub-school, the group of 3rd major sub-school was standing. This group belonged to the Yunnu sub-school. As the name suggested, all the disciples in this major sub-school were females. The group consisted of many beautiful young female students, and all of them looked very attractive, and they had also grabbed the attraction of most of the male disciples. And Yunnu sub-school can also be called Jade Lady sub-school. The leader looked roughly 18 to 19-year-old, dressed in yellow clothes flapping in the wind, long hair, and had a delicate jade-like skin. 2 strands of hair were gently flowing by the wind over her cheeks, which were complementing her seductive appearance even more. This was the genius female disciple of Jade Lady sub-school and was named Zhang San Yuin. It was said that few years ago she had easily stepped into the Xiantian realm and no one knew what her cultivation level was now. Zhang San Yuin, Yan Qiliang, and Shangguan Xuani were said to be the 3 strongest disciples of this year, and each of them had unfathomable strength. Although other disciples would have to wait as they did not know which vein they might join, but that was not the case for the disciples of Jade Lady Sub-School, because it was already fixed for them. Jade Lady Sub-School was a subsidiary of Yi Yuan School's Jade Lady Mountain Peak. So all the disciples were going to join the Jade Lady Mountain Peak in the future. And the reason was that Jade Lady Mountain Peak only accepted female disciples, while Jade Lady Sub-School had been established by a previous senior of Jade Lady Mountain Peak. So it was only obvious for the disciples of the Jade Lady Sub-School to join Jade Lady Mountain Peak. So relatively speaking, they didn't need to participate in this assessment. In addition to these 3 sub-schools, there were some other first-class sub-schools having more than 10 disciples who had already entered into the Xiantian realm. And then there were middle-level sub-schools like Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. Lastly, there are sub-schools with only 1 or 2 sub-Xiantian masters. In this world, where strength was the supreme law and truth, only strong could command respect. Zhang Sun Yuan is just like an angel. She is the not only beautiful, but is also this year's strongest disciple of Jade Lady Sub-School. I heard that it has already been decided that she is going to be the leader of the disciples at Jade Lady Mountain Peak and will also become the senior of the Mountain Peak someday. No wonder, it's really extraordinary how Jade Lady Sub-School accepts only female disciples and turns them into such strong masters. Shangguan Xuani, Yan Qiliang, and Zhang Sun Yuan are this year's strongest among all of us, and no one even knows what their true strengths are. I have heard from some people that the 3 of them are already at the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, or may even have reached the Xiantian 4th stage. When the disciples standing in the surrounding heard this, they could help but hold their breaths. Peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, or Xiantian 4th stage. To them, masters of such strengths were simply godlike existences. Sunday, Chapter 92 in few hours. And, yes, I could reach my target of releasing up to Chapter 93 by Sunday. Monday, sponsored Chapters 93 and 94 will come along with Sunday's regular Chapter 95 and Monday's regular Chapter 96. Raised so far, $90, 300%. Queue is cleared for sponsored Chapters 92, 93, and 94. Chapter 92. NT. Thanks to Suvin Chantha, US, for sponsoring Chapter 92. Chapter 92. See you later, Huaming Han. Perhaps this level of strength was not too conspicuous in the main sect, but for many sub-schools it was already very scary. All of these disciples were undoubtedly very talented, and after entering into the main sect, they would start to cultivate vigorously. In the future, they would most likely enter into the Zhandao realm and become true disciples. Peak of Xiantian 3rd stage. Yi Shiwen turned again to look at the 3 strongest disciples and noticed that they were probably only a step away from reaching the Xiantian 4th stage, and right now, he was not a match for any of them. But Yi Shiwen was not worried about these 3 geniuses, because he was confident that he would eventually be able to catch up with them. Junior Sister Apprentice, take a look. These are this year's disciples. Yi Zaiwen's eyes were closed when suddenly a loud voice reached his ears, accompanied with the sound of flapping wings. 2 demon birds flew down from the sky. On top of a large eagle stood a man with an appearance of about 27-year-old, clad in traditional Chinese clothes, dancing in the wind, and there was a smile on his face. The other bird was Snow White Crane, carrying a black-clothed beautiful woman who had a pair of black curved eyebrows and pure white skin. Looking at her, it seemed as if a celestial beauty had just descended into the mortal world. Everyone's eyes were attracted to both of them. Even Yi Shiwen was no exception, but his eyes were not on the man but on the woman atop the crane. Huaming Han. Yi Shiwen was determined that this was definitely the girl he had rescued in the cave, compared to the slightly awkward girl he had seen last time. This time when he saw Huaming Han, she was really like a fairy having an unparalleled grace and elegance. Her appearance was truly pleasing to the eyes. Huaming Han seemed to have noticed Yi Zaiwen's gaze and turned to look at him. After seeing Yi Shiwen, Huaming Han was somewhat surprised, as she did not expect to meet him so soon. Moreover, his current strength had really surprised her, because when the last time she had met him, he was only a Hotian realm master, although while rescuing her, he had beheaded Luo Tian, but at that time she had seriously injured Luo Tian. But now Yi Shiwen had not just broken through to the Xiantian realm and was already at the peak of Xiantian first stage. Hua Menghan slowly descended from her crane, and step by step walked towards Yi Shiwen while simply ignoring the Chinese robed youth, who was constantly trying to talk to her. "You came," Hua Menghan said. "En." Yi Shiwen nodded. "I still haven't thanked you for the last time," Hua Menghan said, as she was in a hurry last time and had left without thanking him personally, which could be considered a very rude behavior. "It doesn't matter, that was as easy as lifting a hand." Yi Shiwen shook his head and said, as he had benefited a lot from that incident and couldn't ask for more. Junior sister apprentice. At this time, the Chinese robed youth also came over. "Who are you?" The Chinese robed youth frowned and shouted in a low tone. He had instinctively felt some threat from Yi Shiwen. Seeing the youth questioning Yi Shiwen, Hua Menghan wrinkled her black eyebrow. But right then Yi Shiwen said, "Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, Yi Shiwen." Yi Shiwen could see arrogance and a look of disdain in the eyes of that Chinese robed youth. The main sect disciples always looked down on the disciples from sub-schools, as there was a huge difference between their strengths. But that Chinese robed youth forced a smile on his face and said, "Hello, junior disciple. I'm Huyanghang, a core disciple." When Yi Shiwen heard that Huyanghang was a core disciple, adding to his arrogant tone, the meaning was clear that he was obviously pursuing Hua Menghan and was one of her suitors. And this was a method of warning him to stay away. Just like Hua Menghan, Yi Shiwen also neglected Huyanghang. He took out a phoenix-shaped jade pendant, then put it before Hua Menghan and said, "I give this jade rare treasure back to you." There was a shocked look in Huyanghang's eyes, and his gaze was continuously swinging between Hua Menghan and Yi Shiwen. How could he not know that this jade pendant was very precious to Hua Menghan and she would never allow others to even take a look at it? And now it actually appeared in the hands of Yi Shiwen. Exactly what had happened between the two of them, that Hua Menghan had actually given her precious jade pendant to someone else. Thinking of all sorts of possibilities, suddenly Huyanghang looked at Yi Shiwen with a killing look flashing in his eyes. "Since you already have it, just keep it," Hua Menghan lightly said. "In comparison to what you did for me, this jade pendant is simply not enough." When many disciples standing around in the crowd have heard Hua Menghan, they could secretly make a guess that Yi Shiwen must have handled some major matter that had actually led to his friendship with this fairy. Yi Shiwen did not want to explain anything to anyone, as this secret belonged to the two of them, and he wanted to keep this thing a secret between just the two of them. "Assessment is about to start. I won't take your time anymore." After saying a few words to Yi Shiwen, she didn't stay there for too long and flew into the sky on her crane and soon disappeared from the eyes of everyone. When Huyanghang saw Hua Menghan leaving, he was also not in a mood to stay there. He first gave gloomy glances to Yi Shiwen, then mounted his eagle and left. After the two of them left, many disciples of various sub-schools started to give curious looks to Yi Shiwen because they didn't know how he had come to know a disciple from Full Moon Peak. Even Shangguan Xuani, Yan Chiling, and Zhang Senyuan had turned back and were looking curiously at Yi Shiwen. Although they did not have to be specific, but anyone could make a guess that those two were definitely the disciples of Full Moon Peak, because except the true disciples and elder class people, as well as some characters with special permissions, only the disciples of this peak were allowed to fly over the Full Moon Peak. The people of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were especially very curious. They couldn't understand how Hua Menghan was on such friendly terms with Yi Shiwen, and it seemed that she owed him a great debt as well. Otherwise, why would she be willing to give her personal jade pendant to him? Although they did not know the specific effects of that jade pendant, but with just one look, anyone could see that the jade pendant was really extraordinary. Faced with so many curious gazes, Yi Shiwen directly closed his eyes. Yi Shiwen had killed Luo Tian and people of his clan, so he didn't want to get in trouble by getting a new, formidable enemy. Yi Shiwen also did not want to develop a habit of stirring up trouble wherever he goes. The crowd did not continue to look at Yi Shiwen because assessment examination had finally started. And good night, guys. Monday, bonus chapters 93 and 94 will come along with Sunday's regular chapter 95 and Monday's regular chapter 96, raised so far $60, 200%. Queue is cleared for bonus chapters 93 and 94. Chapter 93. And thanks to Jeffrey Dementier, France, for sponsoring Chapter 93. Chapter 93. Wanmo surprise attack. The assessment examination had finally begun, and this was going to be a turning point in their lives. Yi Shiwen also did not have many thoughts about Huan Menghan, because at the moment one could say that he was still very far away from her. A purple-clothed old man flew from a distant place and arrived in front of the disciples. He was an elder of Full Moon Peak, and without any idle talk, he just looked at the crowd, then said, "This entry assessment examination begins." The purple-clothed elder conveniently waved his hand, and suddenly the space began to violently fluctuate. A mysterious streak of light appeared out of nowhere, and it seemed that the whole space had been ripped open, and a gate formed, which slowly opened with a loud rumble. Suddenly, a large amount of lingqi, mixed with disgusting gas, spewed out from the gate. Fortunately, the Hotian realm disciples had not yet opened up the world bridge, and so they couldn't feel the sudden discharge of lingqi from the gate. However, those Xiantian realm disciples suddenly felt the presence of this disgusting gas and frowned with a clear displeasure on their faces. However, it was not surprising for everyone because they had already been informed by their elders that there were a large number of Huanma devils present in the Huanma territory. So, of course, there would be a large amount of magic present in the atmosphere. In fact, so far, it was found that only devil race could biologically adapt to Machi. Even the most violent and powerful demon beasts couldn't withstand the direct instill of Machi. And Machi can mean devil chi or magical chi. However, Yi Zaiwen's eyes had brightened when he discovered that the special space in his mind was able to absorb the Machi. He already knew that he could absorb the lingqi present in the atmosphere in the mysterious space, but had never done it before because the absorption effectiveness of lingqi from the atmosphere was too slow. Even in the lingqi-enriched environment of Yiyuan School, the absorption rate of lingqi was very less compared to that of the lingqi present in the spirit stones. After all, formation of these spirit stones would take innumerable years of absorption of lingqi, so it was natural that it would be easy to extract lingqi from spirit stones. Yi Shiwen thought, since he could absorb the machi in the special space, then he might also be able to absorb yaoqi or other energy forms of qi as well. And yaoqi means evil qi, but Yi Shiwen didn't have enough time to think of this matter as the sub-school teams had started entering the Huanma territory one by one according to their ranks. The team of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School also walked towards the entrance of Huanma territory. The purple-clothed elder waved his hand, and a huge bubble formed, and they were wrapped inside it, and the team quickly disappeared from the eyes of the crowd. No one knew after how long. The team of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School finally appeared in the Huanma territory, and everywhere they could see a devastated scenery. The ground was withered, and from time to time, magical fire was coming out of the fissures in the ground, and the air containing the mixture of lingqi and machi was blowing on their faces. The environment here was quite harsh, and originally this territory belonged to the devil race, which was once destroyed, and they had already left. Not to mention those Huanma devils were the remaining part of the lost devil civilization. It was similar to a situation where a modern man would leave the city to live in the forest for decades. Is this Huanma territory? It is even more desolate than expected. One of the disciples sighed and said, "Yes." Zhang Yang nodded. "It seems like the random transportation like the last time, and without a map, we do not even know our location." "There's no need to hurry. Once we find a Huanma city, we will naturally get a map from there." Yi Feng said, as in the Huanma territory, Huanma race should be considered the indigenous, and it was not surprising if they had a map. Moreover, Huanma belonged to the devil race, but they certainly were intelligent creatures. Therefore, they also had small towns in the Huanma territory. but these towns were simply just a prototype and couldn't be regarded as real towns. Suddenly, the air distorted and the surrounding scenery instantly changed, and in a flash, numerous tall buildings and a bustling metropolis took shape in front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt nostalgic about the scenery. For a long time he had not seen such scenery which used to be so common for him. That very common scenery containing the reinforced concrete buildings of the city, but at this moment seemed so friendly. This scene was buried deep inside his heart, but he did not know when it would disappear. Yi Shiwen suddenly sneered and punched forward, containing the terrifying might of a tornado, which swept clean the scene instantly. At this time, the nostalgic scene disappeared and returned back into the scene of Huanma territory. As he had expected, this was really the illusion magic, although he was well prepared before coming, as Lin Zhantian had reminded everyone to be attentive in the Huanma territory. Huanma excelled at using illusion magic to confuse people, and once someone fell into the trap, he will be quickly defeated or even eaten. Sure enough, when Yi Shiwen opened his eyes, he saw hundreds of Huanma heading towards them. Their bodies were very small, only 2 feet tall for arms, and the size of their head was almost more than their whole body. 2 huge red eyes were flickering with ominous rays of light, and their big bloody mouths were open and were rushing towards the team of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. A Huanma had already rushed to the front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen sneered and shot his palm, producing a thunderstorm rumbling sound. Pass like thunder and move like the wind, and his palm directly shot into the big mouth of the Huanma. Boom! The Hotian 9th stage Huanma immediately exploded in a single blow. Almost in a flash, half of the body of that Huanma turned into mochi. The bodies of these Huanma devils were mostly made up of energy, coupled with the unusually large brain which they specially used to send out illusion magic with ease. In an instant, the mochi that passed through the body of Yi Shiwen was absorbed by the mysterious space and deepened his comprehension of various martial arts. In fact, Yi Zaiwen's martial arts practice never stopped in the special space, but when he fully immersed himself in practicing, then the efficiency also increased, and after absorbing the mochi from the dead Huanma, he realized that the comprehension speed in the mysterious space was a little faster compared to when he absorbed the ling qi from spirit stones. But at this time he didn't have much time to think. He instantly drew his long blade and chopped out a brilliant bladiki in the shape of several meters long bladiki, which instantly arrived in front of several Huanma, and they were split in half. At this time, Yi Feng, Zhang Yan, and Yi Ruxue, the other 3 Xiantian masters, also shattered their illusions and rushed towards the attacking Huanma. After a while, the other disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School also shattered their respective illusions and joined the fight. Chapter 94. NT. Thanks to Thomas Metzger, U.S. and Corey Sagawa, U.S. for sponsoring Chapter 94. Chapter 94. Masters intercept Yi Shiwen heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that Huanma itself was not a strong creature, but the problem was their raid. They would first release an illusion magic, and people would unknowingly fall into the illusion, although most of the experts had firm minds and wouldn't take long to break out of the illusion. But even if they took a couple of seconds to break out, these 2 seconds would often decide their fate, because for ordinary people, 2 seconds were nothing, but that was not the case for a warrior facing Huanma raid. Sure enough, Yi Shiwen had not expected, but the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain disciples would so easily escape from Huanma's illusion. Even if the numbers of Huanma were 5 times more than their own, under the leadership of Yi Shiwen and the others, killing those Huanma had become child's play for the team. Everyone easily killed 1 or more Huanma and completed the assessment without any fundamental difficulty. But even after quickly slaughtering these Huanma, they were not relaxed, because clearance was not their main goal. Clearing the assessment was easy, unless someone had a severe bad luck. Passing with extraordinary scores was their actual goal. Anyway, this test had a full month's time, and everyone had plenty of time to hone their skills, but also kill more Huanma for better performance. Everyone knew that their actions inside the Huanma territory were being observed by high-level school personnel, so they just needed to give a good performance to catch their attention. Now that we are inside the Huanma territory, we may encounter danger at any time, and those Huanma may appear anywhere, so we have to be careful at all time. Yi Feng said, "Yes." The disciples said in unison. Before coming here, the goal for these disciples was to pass the assessment, and then only they would think about getting good results. But since Yi Shiwen was with them, their morale had increased. In their hearts, Yi Shiwen had completely replaced Yi Feng. Although Yi Shiwen was younger in age, but to them he was just like their spiritual leader. Yi Zaiwen's strength was still not comparable to that of Shangguan Xuani, but his strength was still among the group of disciples with their strengths, right below the 3 strongest disciples. And being led by such a strong master was very assuring for them, as anyway they want die in the Huanma territory. However, Yi Feng was keeping silent and was not talking much after coming to the Huanma territory, because he was a little anxious as Huanma were not their only opponents. Even excluding the 3 major sub-schools, there still were a lot of strong sub-schools with many Xiantian masters. These Xiantian masters from various sub-schools had come from all over the Great Yu State to enter into Yiyuan School, and possessed different kinds of martial arts and unknown killing techniques and skills. So far, they had not yet encountered another team, but sooner or later, they might encounter a very formidable opponent. Although they won't die in the Huanma territory, but they would still be thrown outside after dying. Days passed, and shortly, the Qingfeng mountain crowd had spent more than 3 days in the Huanma territory. In 3 days, they faced Huanma raids several times, but the crowd had already become experienced in fighting off the Huanma and had at least beheaded 56 Huanma, and with that they had extraordinarily completed the assessment. Wu Hao and Qian Wanru were on the verge of having a breakthrough, and it seemed that they might have it in the Huanma territory. It was a good thing for them that they were going to enter into the Xiantian realm before joining the main sect. On this day, they approached a mountain and were thinking about exploring it when suddenly 7 figures jumped out and intercepted them. They were, in every respect, releasing an extremely terrifying aura and were definitely very powerful Xiantian masters. The complexion of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School suddenly changed. 7 powerful Xiantian masters had actually come out of nowhere and intercepted them. One must know that even a moderate rank sub-school had less than 7 Xiantian masters, and Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School had only 4. And each of these 7 Xiantian masters had a strong Xiantian aura, and the weakest of them was at least the master of Xiantian's 2nd stage, which had totally startled them. "Who are you people? Why are you blocking our way?" Yi Shiwen came forward and asked. He had noticed 3 of these 7 masters in the plaza. He was paying attention to the strong masters in the plaza and had made a mental note of the top players from various sub-schools. He knew that these people were one of the strongest Xiantian masters of this year. But he had not seen the other 4 masters, and it was possible that they didn't belong to any sub-schools and were definitely newcomers. After all, Yiyuan School was one of the 4 great sects and held a huge influence in the Great Yustat. So during the triennial examination, the aspiring disciples were not only from the respective sub-schools, but from all parts of the state. Various powerful clans from all over the Great Yu State would also send their elite disciples to join the main sect and bring glory to their clans. Although the number of disciples who had entered the Huanma territory to participate in the assessment exam was very large, but Huanma territory was very huge, much larger compared to Blood Yuan territory, and therefore they had not encountered other disciples for these many days. But as the days would pass, the number of encounters would continue to grow more and more. These people were not very old and seemed around the age of 20, but all of them had a dignified appearance, and presumably were top masters in the younger generation of their clans. "You are Yi Shiwen?" The Chinese-robed young man who was standing in the middle and seemed like the leader of these 7 masters asked. All the sub-school disciples had heard about the recent exploits of Yi Shiwen, because the rumors had made him quite famous among the disciples as the undefeated sub-school disciple. The disciples from other schools or clans who didn't belong to any sub-schools were generally very talented. After all, they were not stupid. If they tried to enter into the main sect with poor strength, then they would only become handyman disciples. That is the reason why only strong masters of Xiantian realm would come to join the Yi Yuan school's main sect. Yi Zaiwen's heart sank when he heard that they had actually come for him. He looked towards the Chinese robed man and replied, "It's me. What do you want?" Chapter 95. NT. Chapter 95 is Sunday's regular chapter. I will try to release regular chapter 96 in few hours, otherwise it will come in Tuesday's grand release along with sponsored chapters 97, 98, 99, and 100, chapter 95. Your family members are bugs. It's me. What do you want? Yi Shiwen looked at the 7 people, and almost all of them looked dignified and seemed like the elite disciples from their respective clans or schools. But this time they had actually come to join the main sect. Your journey ends here. The Chinese-robed young man coldly said, "You should know that you must never offend people you can't resist." Among these 7 people, not even one of them had a lower cultivation than Yi Shiwen. All of them had a terrifying presence. Not to mention, they had come together for him, so it was going to get rough. The 4 of them, standing on the sides, were amazingly at the peak of Xiantian second stage, with 40% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. The 3 in the middle were at the Xiantian third stage, with 50% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. Chinese-robed young man standing in the middle had an amazing aura and was staring coldly at Yi Shiwen as if he was looking at a bug. On his left was a diminutive young youth with a sinister look on his face, and his expression resembled that of a poisonous snake. On his right was an extremely seductive woman, dressed in purple Chinese dress, exposing her nice figure, but there was a cold expression on her face. Yi Shiwen noticed that this trio would prove to be very tough opponents for him, and it would be very difficult to deal with any of them. He needed to be very careful while fighting them. He could easily take on each of these 7 masters in a one-on-one battle, and Huanma territory was best for battles like this. But right now, the situation was a little perilous for him because all 7 of them had come together for his life, and he didn't even know how he had offended them or exactly whom he had offended. In the end, he might not have enough energy left to fight all of them. How can there be so many strong Xiantian masters? Yi Feng's heart sunk down, because he was only at the peak of Xiantian first stage, and except Yi Shiwen, no one else in the team was more powerful than him. Because of this, he could clearly feel the terrifying aura of these 7 masters and knew that they were very strong. "It's scary," Yi Rushua muttered. "Yi Shiwen, you will die today without even getting a chance to fight back. That senior said to teach you a lesson to make you understand your own status, so that you know whom you should get close to and with whom you should not." The diminutive youth licked his lips, and a killing intent flashed in his eyes. Hu Yanheng. In Yi Zaiwen's mind, that name immediately cropped up. The diminutive youth had already given him enough hints that it was easy to guess the enemy's identity. This Hu Yanheng was really very insidious and ruthless, just to make him understand to not get close to Huang Menghan. He had planned all this to teach him a lesson in Huanma territory. Yi Shiwen's heart was filled with anger and hatred for that arrogant bastard who thought he was superior to others and couldn't mind his own damn business. "Let me teach him a lesson." A blue-robed youth came forward and said, "We are not your enemies, but you still must intercept us. This is really going too far." "Qian," Wanru said with indignation, "you all leave right now." Yi Shiwen suddenly said, "How can we just go and leave you alone?" Yi Rushua said in a worried tone, "These people are the top players, and even if you stay, you won't be of much help." Yi Shiwen said like a true leader because he knew that sometimes quantity could not make up for strength. Except Yi Shiwen, the strongest among them was Yi Feng, who was only at the peak of Xiantian first stage, and most of other disciples were still the masters of the Hotian realm. If they stayed, it would be totally meaningless to fight a hopeless battle, so they might as well leave in advance. "Hey, you are quite knowledgeable." The diminutive young people sneered, and since their main goal was just Yi Shiwen, they didn't care about other weaklings. Everyone thought the same because that was the truth. Under the siege of so many strong Xiantian masters, Their presence would only prove to be an obstacle for Yi Shiwen. Qingfeng mountain people quickly made their decisions, and so did Yi Shiwen, and most importantly in the Huanma territory. Even if someone died inside, they would immediately be thrown outside, so it was not that Yi Shiwen was really in a life-threatening danger. After thinking a lot and making their decisions soon, the Qingfeng mountain crowd left, leaving only Yi Shiwen and the 7 masters on the scene. Yi Shiwen was relieved because now he could display his full strength and go all out without caring about anything. Good, those bugs are gone, hey. It seems that you are quite famous among the disciples of your sub-school. The blue-robed youth sneered and said, Bugs. A killing intent flashed in Yi Zaiwen's eyes. The blue-robed youth took a step, and like a tornado, he rushed towards Yi Shiwen, with his fist forming a huge storm, and a terrifying twisting Quanjin suddenly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen sneered and shot his palm, rushing thunder hand, pass like thunder and move like the wind, and with a rumbling sound of thunder, his palm wrapped in lightning like Jinqi instantly greeted the coming fist. Boom! The collision produced a loud sound accompanied with layer by layer of shock waves rushing in all directions, as if the mighty waves were running on the surface of the sea. These waves became a huge, twisting storm and swept off the scene. The fights between Xiantian and Hotian realm masters would always be on entirely different levels, because Xiantian masters could directly stimulate the Lingqi fluctuations in the atmosphere, making these fights highly destructive. Yi Zaiwen's terrifying palm attack had easily blocked off and wiped out the storm created by the blue-robed youth's attack. There was a surprised look on his face, as he did not expect his attack to be effortlessly blocked off by Yi Shiwen. Bugs, Yi Shiwen sneered. Your family members are bugs. Yi Shiwen instantly rushed towards him, as if a celestial being was talking a stroll, and with a group of thundercloud like Zhenqi covering his right hand. He shoved it towards the body of that blue-robed youth. He didn't even have a chance to react. The 3 powerful masters suddenly shouted, Stop! You dare! Stop! Yi Shiwen didn't care about these people and instantly shot his palm. Boom! The thunder-like Zhenqi blasted into the chest that blue-robed youth and instantly blasted him away. He was sent flying into the sky, but suddenly his stature turned into a streamer and directly disappeared. Chapter 96. NT. This is a regular chapter. Chapter 96. Arduous Battle. Boom! The thunder-like Zhenqi blasted into the chest that blue-robed youth and instantly blasted him away. He was sent flying into the sky, but suddenly his stature turned into a streamer and directly disappeared. He died in Huanma territory, but he didn't really die, but disappeared into a streamer and was thrown back into the outside world. How dare you! The remaining 6 people were looking at Yi Shiwen with a look of disbelief on their faces. They just couldn't digest the fact that Yi Shiwen had actually killed their comrade in a blink of an eye. They just never thought that things would turn out like this. They were overconfident, and looking at their strengths, this assessment was going to be very easy for them. When they were given the task to ambush Yi Shiwen and teach him a lesson, they had considered this task a child's play. After all, he was just one guy, and his strength was also below their own. They had imagined that he would be crushed to death in a single blow from that blue-robed youth. But what just happened? Yi Shiwen sneered and said, One bug crushed, and now it's your turn. Will you all come together, or one by one? Yi Shiwen took a deep breath, relaxed his whole body, concentrated. He must fight because he had no chance of retreat. His only option was to go all out, not to mention that he wouldn't die here. So this was a good opportunity to fight so many powerful masters and gain experience. Since this was an examination and these rivals could be called his enemies, so he could only continue to conquer his enemies one by one, and then only he would be able to become invincible. Yi Shiwen even had a crazy idea to use the extraordinary strengths of these 6 men and force his inner state to its limits. Then he might be able to have a breakthrough, because it was said that a breakthrough could be initiated during a life and death situation by forcing oneself to the extreme. You are courting death. Arrogant. These masters were suddenly outraged as whether they belonged to sub-schools or other outer forces coming from all over the state. But there was no doubt that all of them were top talents from their respective forces and had never been insulted like this. Not to mention, they had come to crush him. But now, one of them had been crushed instead, and he had dared to insult them as well. Yi Zaiwen's provocation had hurt their pride and dignity, and this unexpected humiliation had caused their anger to suddenly erupt. "Kill him!" All 6 of them shouted and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Being the outstanding disciples in their forces, each of them possessed one or more secret Xiantian power techniques, practiced to the profound level. At this time, various types of martial arts blasted towards Yi Shiwen. He finally pulled out a long blade from the scabbard on his back and waved it violently, which instantly shot a dazzling blade light towards the incoming rumbling attacks. Boom! A heart-shaking loud sound burst out, sending shockwaves in all directions, causing the smoke and dust to spread in surrounding area. Yi Zaiwen's body was fully wrapped in Xiantian Jinqi body, and he leaped up towards the sky. And instead of retreating back, he used Celestial Step, and in a flash his figure rushed horizontally all the way towards the 6 masters with his long blade scattering a bright blade light. Ah! A master didn't get a chance to evade the blade attack and was split in half and disappeared in the very next instant. This was indeed a terrifying battle where the fight had begun only an instant ago and a master had already been beheaded. The remaining 5 didn't have a shred of mercy and severely attacked Yi Shiwen. Even if he was using celestial steps, he had been hit several times and many wounds appeared on his body. "Yi Shiwen, you are strong. I admit that you are very strong, but unfortunately you are facing so many of us and you no chance of winning. Just surrender, because anyway no one really dies in this Huanma territory." The Chinese-robed young man said. He was a prideful person, but he had to admit that Yi Shiwen was ridiculously strong, because even if they were ganging up on one individual, but they were still having a hard time coping with him. There was clearly a look of disdain on their faces, because 2 of their own had been effortlessly defeated by the guy they had initially looked down upon. But he was still giving them a hard time in this brutal fight, so they had to admit that Yi Shiwen was truly formidable. Yi Shiwen sneered, but didn't answer. He was bathed in blood, but the wounds couldn't make him to withdraw, but only made him to have a clear understanding that although no one would die in the Huanma territory, but they would still get mentally and physically injured. In the world of martial arts, there was no retreat. Giving up was never an option, and the most important practice was to persevere, or else all previous efforts would come to naught. Yi Shiwen was not planning to give up just because he had sustained injuries. This time he strengthened his determination with the thought that this was an illusion, so he must persevere to break out of it. Phew! A subtle, piercing sound echoed, and out of the blue, it seemed as if a dagger had arrived to the front of Yi Shiwen. But it was actually that diminutive youth. He was extremely fast and had practiced a strange agility technique because his movements were similar to that of snakes, which could easily scare people. But suddenly, the Chinese-robed youth appeared in front of Yi Shiwen and blasted his punch, releasing a golden Quanjin. It seemed as if a golden light had illuminated the entire world, but the atmosphere had been distorted by the burst of this golden Quanjin. A cold light flashed in Yi Zaiwen's eyes, and the spirit stone started to burn, producing an unimaginable amount of lingqi, which was directly injected into the special space. A large influx of martial arts experience entered into his mind, and it would be no exaggeration to say that he was trying his best to surpass his own limits. When fighting against 5 strong Xiantian masters, most people would have already lost confidence by now. And talking about most people, there was simply no chance for them to grab the victory in a situation like this. But Yi Shiwen refused to give up on the slightest hope of victory. These series of attacks were extremely dangerous. No need to say that Chinese-robed youth was the most terrifying opponent. The charming woman had a hand mirror, and she was using it to constantly send out waves of intermittent divine streaks of light, and wherever the light would shine, the space would immediately distort. The might of her attack was abnormally terrifying. This was the biggest crisis Yi Shiwen had ever come across. A crazed look flashed in Yi Zaiwen's eyes. The long blade incessantly danced in his hand, and instantly 9 blade shadows appeared in the sky. Boom! The Quan Jin of that Chinese-robed youth bombed fiercely on Yi Zaiwen's body. He spat a mouthful of blood, and his black hair flew upwards, but his body was like an iron wall that didn't budge at all. Instead, he continued to swing his long blade, with all of his focus centered on the diminutive youth. Boom! Yi Zaiwen's long blade chopped out towards the flying dagger-like diminutive youth, releasing the 9 blade shadows which blocked off all of his escape routes. Wednesday. Since the queue didn't clear for Tuesday's grand release, Chapter 97 will come as a regular release on Wednesday along with bonus chapters depending on the queue completion. I can release up to 3 sponsored chapters. Raised so far, $45, 150%. Queue cleared for sponsored Chapter 98, 100%. Queue status for sponsored Chapter 99, 50%. Thanks to Thomas Edwards, New Zealand, Bornemissa Peter, Hungary, and Abdelkrim Wahasna, France, for sponsoring Chapter 98, 100%. Thanks to David Pedersen, Sweden, for opening the queue for sponsored Chapter 99, 50%. Chapter 97. NT. This is a regular chapter. Chapter 98 in few hours. Chapter 97 breakthrough. Xiantian's second stage, regardless of where that diminutive youth was trying to flee. He was still unable to escape from the blade curtain of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had reached a high degree of proficiency in using the move, New Moon Beheader, and the curtain of 9 blades had instantly blocked all the movements of that diminutive youth. He had been completely surrounded by this curtain of blades and had been unable to utilize his agility skill. Pucci. The diminutive youth just stood there as if he had already given up and let Yi Shiwen to behead him. It was not that he didn't want to do anything, but he couldn't. Regardless of where he wanted to escape, Yi Zaiwen's blade would easily catch up to him. At last, he was directly beheaded by Yi Shiwen and disappeared. The remaining 4 masters were furious because in a short time, Yi Shiwen had unexpectedly beheaded 3 of their comrades, especially the diminutive youth, as he was one of the 3 strongest masters in their group and had been slaughtered so easily. You are courting death. The charming woman shouted loudly and violently shook the hand mirror in her hand. The divine rays of light rumbled and went directly towards Yi Shiwen. Bang! 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 Intermittent terrifying explosions occurred when Yi Shiwen tried to block the divine light with his palm, but as the divine light fell on his palm, it started to directly disintegrate his iron-like palm, which was immediately covered in blood. In his body, the mad revolution of Zhen Qi was going on. Breakthrough. He just needed to have a breakthrough, because that was the only way out of this situation. If he didn't have a breakthrough, then facing the deadly attacks of these masters would only lead to his end. Although he had beheaded the diminutive youth, but at the same time he had also suffered the golden fist attack from the Chinese robed youth, and the injury he had sustained was getting more and more serious. Yi Shiwen didn't run away and was betting everything on the breakthrough. He needed to have it during the battle because he had no other choice left, and if he couldn't succeed in having a breakthrough soon, then it would most likely be a dead end for him. Yi Shiwen roared loudly, while the Zhen Qi was rushing madly inside his body, layer upon layer, like waves of the sea. His black hair was dispersed and flying in the wind, and his whole body was covered in severe wounds and blood. If looked from afar, he seemed like a reincarnation of a mad god of killing from ancient times, who had returned to wreak havoc on this world. Yi Zaiwen's eyes were somewhat vacant as he was unceasingly processing innumerable information in his mind, while the Zhen Qi was madly revolving inside his body. He seemed like a puppet resisting the attacks of those 4 masters, with only a small section of consciousness left to operate the body, while his main consciousness was completely immersed in the martial god space, desperately trying to break through his inner state. Also, he was able to do it because he was accustomed to this, but before he would keep his main spirit on the outside, and now he was focusing his main spirit into the martial god space. Bang! Yi Shiwen was blasted away and sent flying again. The muscles on his chest darted off in all directions, along with a lot of blood. Ha ha ha! He is still refusing to die. The Chinese robed youth laughed and said, "The remaining 3 masters were finally relieved. After all, it was too hard to deal with a formidable master like Yi Shiwen. 7 masters had ganged up on him, but he had still been able to kill 3 of them in a short time. It clearly showed that none of them were his opponents in a one-on-one battle. Fortunately, they had pushed him to a dead end and could finally behead him. Suddenly, they discovered that the present Yi Shiwen had somewhat changed, and right then, a majestic aura shot up into the sky. The bright look had instantly restored in his eyes, but his aura continued to rise and quickly rose to a pinnacle state. However, his aura didn't actually stop to rise, but bit by bit it continued to rise further towards a breakthrough. Stop him! Hurry up and stop him! Do not let him have a breakthrough! The charming woman suddenly shouted in a sharp voice. She was also a Xiantian master, so how could she not know what was happening? She immediately understood that Yi Shiwen was on the verge of a breakthrough and could have it any time. He was originally so hard to deal with, and if allowed to have a breakthrough, then won't they all lose their lives at his hands? However, it was already too late, as his aura had finally broken through the barrier, and he had finally reached the Xiantian second stage with a 60% transformed Xiantian Jin Qi in his body. After breaking through to the Xiantian second stage, now he could easily contend with masters at the rank of Shangguan Xuani, let alone these 4 masters. Yi Shiwen looked calm and collected, then coldly looked at the 4 masters. The Chinese robed youth immediately rushed towards him, aiming a golden, tornado-like Quan Jin right at him. Yi Shiwen sneered and shot coiling dragon palm. Suddenly, a roaring, gigantic dragon rose from the abyss and soared high in the sky. This was the scene of coiling dragon palm, and this was also the first time he had used this ancient technique in an actual combat. A long, big dragon congealed from the palm of Yi Shiwen and roared loudly. It flew straight towards a golden tornado, opened its big, powerful claws, and directly grasped it. The golden tornado had been immediately neutralized by that dragon, and it went straight towards the Chinese robed youth and maliciously collided with his body. Puff! The Chinese robed youth spout a mouthful of blood, and his body flew upside down. Halfway, he changed into streamer and vanished. At this time, the charming woman's divine light had approached in front of Yi Shiwen and was about to attack his body, but suddenly his long blade flashed and instantly chopped out a terrifying bladiki. The divine light collided head-on with the bladiki and was directly annihilated. But after that, the bladiki didn't stop and directly rushed towards the charming woman. She never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually be so incredibly strong that he would completely annihilate her divine light attack, but she didn't have any time to dodge and was directly split in half. The remaining 2 masters couldn't believe their eyes and were looking incredibly at Yi Shiwen. They couldn't understand that the tables had been turned and the situation had suddenly become dangerous for them. A while ago, they had an upper hand. However, in a short time, the situation had reversed, and Yi Shiwen had got on the winning side after killing the Chinese robed youth and the charming woman. They just couldn't accept such a reversal of situation. However, the 3 strongest masters had been killed by Yi Shiwen, so it was obvious that they did not have the means to escape his wrath. They tried to run away, but were chased down and quickly beheaded by Yi Shiwen. Soon, the 7 masters reappeared in the full moon peak with unsightly complexions. They never thought that even if so many masters would encircle together to kill one person, but they would be killed instead. Before, they also thought that it was such a pity that they wouldn't be able to actually kill Yi Shiwen in the Huanma territory, a place where no one died. But right now, they were actually very happy that luckily it was not the reality, otherwise they would be dead right now. They had clearly seen the ruthless nature of Yi Shiwen and knew very well that even if it was the reality, Yi Shiwen definitely would not have shown any mercy. Instead, he would have killed them even more ruthlessly. Chapter 98. NT. Thanks to Thomas Edwards, New Zealand, Bornemissa Peter, Hungary, and Abdelkrim, Wahasna, France, for sponsoring Chapter 98. Chapter 98. proceeds to join after almost 1 month later in the Huanma territory. With a loud shout, Yi Zaiwen's figure danced together with his long blade and directly split a Huanma into 2 halves. The demon beasts of Xiantian first stage were simply not a match for him, and his blade would easily split them in half. After beheading the Huanma devils, half of their bodies would turn into machi, and he would absorb this machi into the mysterious space. Thanks to this, his understanding of various martial arts techniques had increased considerably. 1 month ago, even killing a Huanma of peak Xiantian third stage was very difficult for him, but now it had become a child's play for him. 5 days ago, he had fought with a Huanma of Xiantian fourth stage, and his fighting strength was so fierce that it had to escape with severe injuries. Although the battle efficiency of Huanma was somewhat low, but it was sufficient enough to let him assess his own strength. Now his strength was easily equivalent to that of masters of peak Xiantian third stage, with 60% transformed Xiantian Jinqi, and he could even contend with masters of Xiantian fourth stage with 70% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. During this month, Yi Shiwen was not in a hurry to meet up with the crowd of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, and had fully concentrated on testing his new strength and honing his skills. And for that, these Huanma devils had become his test subjects. In just a month's practice, his various martial arts had made considerable progress. The technique to show the most progress was restraining breath technique, and he had practiced it to the Deshang realm. At present, he could change his own appearance and breath at will without getting recognized. The Xiantian realm parts of celestial step had also been practiced to the Xiaoqing realm. Now, his speed had increased considerably, and his movements had become even more elegant than before. The last move, Full Moon Beheader of the technique Cold Moon Beheader, had also been practiced to the Xiaoqing realm. The Coiling Dragon Palm first move, Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss, had been practiced to the Xiaoqing realm, and its might had increased by several times. Yi Shiwen could contend with the masters of Xiantian fourth stage by relying on the terrifying might of Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss. But using this move once consumed about 10% of his Jinqi, and though he possessed 60% transformed Xiantian Jinqi, but using this move multiple times could put a lot of pressure on his body. All these days, Yi Shiwen had spent most of his time and energy in deducing the second layer contents of Tyrant Body Technique, and his hard work had paid off, because after spending a total of 1,000 spirit stones, he had finally deduced the second layer and gained the first glimpse of the next layer, and his strength had doubled once again. Now his previous strength of 19 dragons had directly increased to the strength of 39 dragons, which was the combined result of Tyrant Body Technique and reaching the peak of 60% transformed Xiantian Jinqi. Fortunately, only 1,000 spirit stones had been burned to deduce the second layer of Tyrant Body Technique, and he now had 2,000 spirit stones left in his stock, which was still enough to call him wealthy. The main reason behind this was the machi released by dead Huanma. Yi Shiwen would absorb this machi, and this had satisfied the enormous need of energy needed to practice in special space, and this was how he didn't have to use many spirit stones. This was also the reason why he was not in a hurry to meet up with the people of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, but was wandering alone in the Huanma boundary, fighting and killing Huanma. He didn't want to expose to others that he could absorb machi, as this matter was directly related to the special space. Special space could be compared to a giant bulldozer. An expert needed to walk on a rough road with many obstacles to reach his goal, and the job of this space was to flatten the road and make it easier for the expert to walk on it. So what if it looked like a dishonest method if one could become stronger by using it? Yi Shiwen calculated the time and found out that it was almost time to exit the Huanma territory. The 1-month time of assessment examination was going to end, and during this month he couldn't calculate how many Huanma he had killed. However, he didn't care about that because his biggest harvest this time was breaking through to the Xiantian second stage, making it a worthwhile trip. Now, it was time to go and join the group of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. All these days he was being very careful and stayed away from trouble. After all, he had enemies in Huanma territory. Forget about Bingdao Sub-School. Even that Hu Yanghang had sent 7 powerful masters after him, although they had been completely slaughtered by him. Right now, it was obvious that after sending so many formidable masters, Hu Yanghang must be hoping that Yi Shiwen would be easily taken care of. But once he would receive the news that they had been defeated and thrown out of the Huanma territory, he would definitely become very furious. After all, Yi Shiwen had single-handedly crushed a team of 7 top players. If he again encountered those 7 masters, he wouldn't need to struggle against them for so long. He would easily kill them all without breaking a sweat. Even after exiting, if they tried to come looking for trouble, he would certainly finish them off without thinking twice. Yi Shiwen finally decided to go into the direction of Qingfeng mountain group he had just located. Although Huanma boundary was very big, but it was still small compared to the Zhanwujia world, and passing around messages was not difficult, especially for martial artists. In a remote valley, the groups of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and Jade Lady Sub-School were unexpectedly present together, and this combined group was being led by both Yi Feng and Zhang Sun Yuan. But there was a group of people standing on their opposite side and confronting them. It was none other than the group of Bingdao Sub-School, led by Shangguan Xuani. Beside him stood 2 youths, one dressed in purple robe and had an imposing appearance, and another was clad in a yellow robe and had strangely prominent eyebrow bones. Unexpectedly, the strength of these 2 was almost comparable to that of Shangguan Xuani. One could also see that the group of Divine Volcano Sub-School and the disciples of many other sub-schools watching from afar. Junior sister apprentice Zhang Sunyuan surrender the magical sound flute. Shangguan Xuani came forward and said in an overbearing tone, "I and brother, ye had to go through a lot of trouble to obtain this magical sound flute, and you want me to surrender it?" Zhang Sunyuan said in a cold voice, "Let's stop this nonsense and snatch it directly from them." That youth with prominent eyebrow bones said, "Thursday, sponsored chapters 99 and 100 will come on Thursday. Raised so far, $225, 750%. Q cleared for sponsored chapter 99, 100%. Q cleared for sponsored chapter 100, 100%. Chapter 99. And T? Thanks to David Pettersson, Sweden, and Stefan Underlechner, Austria, for sponsoring Chapter 99. Chapter 99. Desperate struggle, there was an ice-cold expression on the face of that yellow-robed youth with prominent eyebrow bones. Since Sister Zhang Sun is not willing to give up on that treasure, then do not blame me for being stingy. Begin." Shangguan Xuani said in a determined voice. The people of Bingdao Sub-School, as well as some other influential people behind him, suddenly rushed towards the groups of Jade Lady Sub-School and Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. Among these disciples, there were many experts of Xiantian realm, and although the disciples of the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and Jade Lady Sub-School tried to resist, but the opposite party had many people, and they possessed high strength. Bingdao Sub-School was a major sub-school like Jade Lady Sub-School, but it possessed greater strength in comparison. Not to mention, the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School were a lot weaker in comparison to the disciples of these major sub-schools, with only 5 Xiantian masters, including Qian Wanru and Wu Ha, who had just broken through to the Xiantian realm. Both sides clashed, and a fierce battle started. Only after a moment, many disciples from Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and Jade Lady Sub-School had been beheaded and turned into streamer and disappeared. Zhang Sunyuan and Yi Feng rushed forward to battle with Shangguan Xuani, the purple-robed youth, and that eccentric-looking yellow-robed youth. If Yi Shiwen was here, he would be shocked to find out that in such a short time when he was away from the group of Qingfeng Mountain, Yi Feng had reached the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage and was not a bit inferior to Shangguan Xuani and other top-ranked masters. Moreover, all of them were strong masters, so it was hard to guess what would be the end result of this large-scale battle. Although Yi Feng and Zhang Sunyuan were collaborating, but the 3 strong masters of the opposite party were tough, and it was too hard for just the 2 of them to take them. Soon, the 3 masters had started to push Yi Feng and Zhang Sunyuan in a disadvantageous situation. At this time, an anxious look appeared on the faces of the two, and the reason was that they had come to realize that their combined fighting strength was inferior to that of the three masters, and they would most likely be completely pressed down. They feared that soon they would be defeated. Shangguan Xuanyi also wanted to defeat Yi Feng and Zhang Sun Yuan in the shortest possible time, and also save power, because he knew that Yan Qiliang was nearby and waiting while covetously eyeing them, and would most likely also enter the fray once they were exhausted. They did not want Yan Qiliang to take advantage of this conflict, and the best solution to this problem was to beat Yi Feng and Zhang Sun Yuan as soon as possible in order to be well prepared when Yan Qiliang would plan to make his move. The trio had high aspirations for the magical sound flute. The battle among these 5 masters was a spectacular one, as all of them were skilled and possessed powerful techniques. Their battle was so fierce that it was sending shock waves throughout the battlefield, and even ground was shaking, which seemed as if their fight was inducing earthquakes. Other disciples were also fighting fiercely, but their battle strength was not at all comparable to that of the 5 masters. In fact, even the shock waves produced from the intense battle of these 5 masters was life-threatening for many disciples, particularly the disciples of Hotian realm. Damn, these disciples of Bingdao Sub-School are really shameless. Qian Wanru clenched her teeth and said in an angry voice. She was actually fighting a Xiantian disciple and being a new Xiantian master. She was having a hard time dealing with him. They actually joined forces with outsiders to bully us. When Qian Wanru said outsiders, she actually meant the disciples who had come from influential clans and didn't belong to any of the sub-schools. They had come to join Yi Yuan School's main sect directly from outside. With respect to the disciples of main sect, the various sub-schools were regarded as branch schools, and they would nurture strong disciples to finally send them to join the main sect. And so, compared to the disciples coming from the outer influential forces, the disciples of various sub-schools were treated as seeds, waiting to finally sprout in the main sect. But in general, over the years, during assessment examination, the disciples from the outer influential clans would form their own camp, different from the disciples of various sub-schools. Moreover, although various sub-schools were rivals, but compared with these outsiders, they were comparatively more intimate. That was the reason why Qian Wanru had said that Bingdao Sub-School had joined forces with outsiders. However, at this time, regrets and complaints were useless. These disciples did not think that they would get a chance to be a part of an adventure, but in the end it turned into this, and after the news leaked out, it attracted countless people. Kill them all! These bastards have gone too far! Wu Hao roared, and after seeing that there were so many people on the opposite party, perhaps the disciples of these 2 sub-schools would have given up in the real world, but it was a good thing that they were in the Huanma territory and did not fear death. Therefore, they would go all out and fight to death, but won't give up so easily. Right, let's kill these bastards who even joined forces with outsiders for their motives. The other disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School roared in unison. The female disciples of Jade Lady Sub-School also roared at this time, although they were charming and incomparably beautiful, but were still considered the outstanding disciples of their sub-school, and even after arriving in the main sect, the disciples of other sub-schools had not dared to disrespect them. Suddenly, the morale of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School and Jade Lady Sub-School had increased because they had finally realized that the worst-case scenario in this situation was death, and even if they died, they would be thrown outside the Huanma territory and resurrect there. Anyway, they had already cleared the assessment examination, and their main motive was to enter into a good vein, and for that, they needed to display their strengths and potential to the high-level personnel of main sect. So, even if a disciple displayed his talents in the beginning, but due to sudden strike of bad luck, he encountered an extremely powerful Huanma and died, but there was still a chance for him to get selected by some high-level personnel. It could be said that 1 month's time allotted for the assessment examination was almost over, and the exam could also be considered finished. So even if they died now, it won't make much difference. Since you want to die, then I'll give you what you want. The eccentric, yellow-robed youth said in a ferocious manner. Obviously, if he decided to massacre the disciples of both Qingfeng Mountain Subschool and Jade Lady Subschool, then who could stop him? The eccentric yellow-robed youth punched out towards Yifeng. He was collaborating with the purple-robed youth to besiege Yifeng. When facing the attacks from two strong masters, he immediately fell into a disadvantageous position. Zhang Sun Yuan glanced towards the desperately fighting figure of Yifeng, then clenched her teeth and said, "If you want the magical sound flute, then you will have to step from our corpses to take it." The yellow-robed youth laughed and said, "Then die." His terrifying Zhen Qi suddenly exploded and sent shock waves rippling through the air, which was quite terrifying. Yifeng resisted against him, but he left an opening, and yellow-robed eccentric youth seized this opportunity to throw a lightning-fast kick towards him. Then, suddenly, a terrifying Bladiki descended from the sky and rushed towards the purple-robed youth. NT, Chapter 100 in an hour or two. Raised so far, $195, 650%. Q cleared for sponsored Chapter 100, 100%. Chapter 100. NT. Thanks to Bruno Holzweber, Austria, for sponsoring Chapter 100. Chapter 100. Beheaded in one blade strike. Then, suddenly, a terrifying Bladiki descended from the sky and rushed towards the purple-robed youth. That purple-robed youth panicked and hastily dodged and barely saved his body from getting chopped. He got furious and shouted, "Who was that?" One could see a distant cyan figure appearing in the horizon, carrying a long blade in his hand. "Little brother." Seeing that cyan figure, Yifeng was overjoyed and immediately shouted. Yi Shiwen slowly approached the battlefield. With a long blade in his hand, Yi Shiwen lightly said, "It's too early to celebrate your victory." All of the people looked towards him. Just now that Bladiki was released from so far, it seems that during this month, this Yi Zaiwen's strength has progressed by leaps and bounds. Standing at a distant place, Yan Qiliang thought while looking at Yi Shiwen. Although he was standing far from the battlefield, but he immediately discovered that it was Yi Shiwen. Yan Qiliang had just now witnessed the incredible might of Yi Zaiwen's blade attack, and he couldn't help but be somewhat startled in his heart. He certainly was aware of Yi Zaiwen's existence, but didn't know much about him. Although he had gathered information about the top disciples of strong sub-schools, after all, they might become his possible rivals. But why would he bother knowing about the top disciples of so many weak sub-schools? Earlier, Yi Shiwen had made a huge commotion, and that had got Yan Qiliang's attention only for a short time because he didn't consider Yi Shiwen as someone worth knowing about. Back then, Yi Zaiwen's strength was almost comparable to that of ordinary Xiantian third-stage masters. With this level of strength, it was impossible for him to be ranked among the top players who were generally at the peak of Xiantian third stage or above. Only by having this much strength, top players like Yan Qiliang would pay attention to masters of other sub-schools. Right now, he had no other choice but to pay attention to Yi Shiwen, but still not to the point of fear. However, he had discovered that Yi Shiwen had recently made a breakthrough, and his strength was no longer under the strength of peak Xiantian third stage. Originally, Yifeng's sudden rise to the peak Xiantian third stage had surprised him, but he never thought that his younger brother, Yi Shiwen, would also have a breakthrough in such a short period of 1 month. He had started to doubt the reputation of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool as one of the weakest subschools, because this time it had actually presented 2 top masters to the main sect, and this number was unexpectedly more than the 3 major subschools. He feared that the fame of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool was going to rise dramatically in the main sect. "Who are you? How dare you sneak an attack on me?" The purple-robed youth shouted in an angry voice. "Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, Yi Shiwen." Yi Shiwen indifferently said, "You are courting death." The purple-robed youth got even more furious, and why would he not? He had been nearly chopped down to a violent death. He suddenly dashed towards Yi Shiwen and used his right leg to send a lightning-fast kick, accompanied with a twisting windstorm, directly at him. In a flash, Yi Shiwen waved his blade and chopped out a sharp and terrifying bladiki. Bang! Two terrifying attacks severely collided against each other and sent violent shock waves in the air, producing a sharp, piercing sound. In an instant, their attacks had completely neutralized each other. The purple-robed youth never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually be so strong. It is not good. How is he so strong? The purple-robed youth pondered that now, with the unexpected appearance of Yi Shiwen, both sides had got 3 pairs of strong masters, and this was a bad sign for their plan. Now that there were 3 pairs of masters, they won't be able to finish this fight in a short time as they planned, and Yan Qiliang, who was currently watching from the distant place, would definitely take advantage of this. The face of purple-robed youth sank, and he shouted loudly, "Birth of the fierce winds!" This was the secret kick-based Xiantian level power technique handed down in his family for generations. Relying on the might of this technique, his forefathers had brought fame to his family, which had gained a high reputation and influence in his hometown. Bang! He shoved his powerful kick into Yi Ziwen's body and was thrown back several steps from the explosion. Just as he was about to attack again, he was surprised to see that his attack had done no damage to Yi Shiwen, who just stood there like an iron wall. Yi Shiwen sneered and said, "You are only at this level?" The purple-robed youth's complexion suddenly changed, and he muttered, "How is this possible?" He clearly knew the explosive strength present in his kick, and that was the reason why he had been thrown back several steps, but he was totally bewildered to find out that even after facing his kick's explosive strength at a point-blank range, Yi Shiwen simply didn't move at all. How could he be so strong? Yi Shiwen sneered because just now he had tried to test the strength of the purple-robed youth and had finally determined that it was nothing. The purple-robed youth wanted to have an advantage of striking the first blow, and without wasting time, his leg moved and swept strong winds towards Yi Shiwen. Full moon beheader! Yi Shiwen chopped out his blade. The might of his blade was truly exquisite and peerless, and it released a terrifying bladiki, which swept towards the strong winds. Although he had not yet practiced full moon beheader to the Deshang realm and had also not fully evolved its creative concept, but it still possessed the true might of a Xiantian level move. However, none of his blade moves were stronger than the move Hidden Dragon rises from the abyss, but using it even once consumed a significant amount of Jinqi, and he didn't want to use it unless it was necessary. Bang! The terrifying bladiki fiercely collided with the strong winds in the sky and wreaked havoc on the scene, and it seemed as if a tsunami had just swept past this area. Everyone was giving dumbfounded looks at this scene when suddenly, in an instant, the terrifying bladiki completely scattered the fierce winds and went straight towards the purple-robed youth and chopped down. The purple-robed youth turned into Streamer and disappeared from the Huanma territory. Just one move. Yan Qiliang, spectating from a distant place, saw this with his own eyes and was totally bewildered. He never thought that a strong master like the purple-robed youth would actually be beheaded in just one strike from Yi Ziwen's blade. Yi Shiwen had fully displayed the true might of his blade, which could easily be considered very frightening, because just a single attack from his blade had actually killed a top-ranked Xiantian master. Yan Qiliang asked himself that his own strength and the strength of that purple-robed youth was about the same, and if he had been killed by Yi Shiwen in just one blade strike, then what would happen if he was to fight with Yi Shiwen? Everyone was shocked, because they thought that this battle was between 2 equally matched masters and would be a fierce one, but they never expected it to be so one-sided. They actually did not know that in the last 1 month, Yi Shiwen had been constantly fighting with Huanma devils of Xiantian 4th stage, and had even severely wounded a Huanma of Xiantian 4th stage. Even if Huanma were small and weak creatures, but a Xiantian 4th stage Huanma was still powerful enough to give a tough time to the top players. Even if his strength was not yet comparable to the masters of Xiantian 4th stage, but it could be said that his strength had far surpassed the strength of masters of peak Xiantian 3rd stage, making him one of the top players. Friday, Chapter 101 will come as a regular release along with some sponsored chapters. Amount not decided yet. I am still not sure about the grand release. Also check donate page for the release schedule of GSI. Raised so far, $230, 766%. Thanks to Toby Hansen, UK, Giannis Macri, Switzerland, Shay Fincher, US, and Etienne Bedard, Canada, for sponsoring the coming sponsored chapters, for which release declaration will be made later on. Chapter 101. NT, this is a regular release. No sponsored chapters would be released today because, from the next chapter onwards, a new series of events start in the story, and it would be enjoyable to read the next few chapters back to back. So, yes, you guessed it right, there will be one or more grand releases on this weekend as well. Though, I am not sure how many chapters one can release in the grand releases. Enjoy! Chapter 101. The two beheaded, if they knew about the current strength of Yi Shiwen, then they wouldn't be so surprised. Right now, he was strong enough to easily take down a master of peak Xiantian 3rd stage, and could also contend with masters of Xiantian 4th stage. By killing the purple-robed youth in a single blade strike, he had instantly turned the wave of war. His sudden appearance had pushed the opposite party to a disadvantageous position. Yi Zaiwen's mighty blade had instantly killed a top-ranked Xiantian master, and this had completely frightened those onlookers who were waiting to take advantage from this battle after the two sides would mutually wound and kill each other. Even the leader of the opposite side, Shangguan Shuani, who was on the winning side a while ago and had planned to finish this battle as soon as possible, had suddenly encountered an unforeseen obstacle to his plan. But their anxiousness was justified because Yi Zaiwen's strength was really unfathomable. He had killed a master of peak Xiantian 3rd stage as if it was nothing. Even Yan Chiling was looking at him with a scared look in his eyes, let alone other people. They could still think of facing top-ranked masters like Shangguan Shuani, Yan Chiling, and others, but facing Yi Shiwen? They feared that they would be killed in just one blade strike, without even getting a chance to fight back, which was really frightening. It was not that no one feared death, even if they knew that they would resurrect outside. The scene of getting chopped down by Yi Zaiwen's blade was just too scary. Damn, Brother Yi is insanely strong. Zhang Yan looked at Yi Zaiwen's blade and said. At the same time, Wu Hao and Qian Wanru also nodded with a look of gratitude and respect in their eyes. They could feel that Yi Zaiwen's strength had increased abnormally in this 1 month's time, and this was not the first time because every once in a while his strength would rise dramatically. But, standing on one side, Yi Rushues seemed calm, as in her mind she already thought of her brother as a metamorphosis. So like always, she was calm as if this was something normal for her younger brother. Yi Shiwen sneered and walked towards that eccentric yellow-robed youth. The yellow-robed youth immediately tensed up because he had also witnessed the insane and mighty blade attack of Yi Shiwen. "Brother," Yi Feng said in a pleasantly surprised voice. This time he was in a very desperate situation in his fight with the yellow-robed youth, but he never thought that his younger brother would unexpectedly arrive in the nick of time and fully turn the flow of battle. Yi Shiwen nodded towards Yi Feng, but suddenly that yellow-robed youth dashed towards Yi Shiwen with a lightning-fast speed and shot his palm. This attack was very amazing as the air in the surrounding had started to rupture under the sudden emergence of trembling Jin Qi, which quickly went towards Yi Shiwen. The palm shadows had filled the sky, and it was obvious that this attack was meant to catch Yi Shiwen off guard, which was really cruel and ruthless. Yi Shiwen sneered, but how could he not be prepared? He immediately shot his palm and unleashed rushing thunder hand, discharging a rumbling thunder, and with a bang, a loud thunderclap resounded throughout the sky. Bang! 2 palm attacks collided fiercely, and the yellow-robed youth immediately staggered and almost fell down from the shock. But at this time, Shangguan Shuani instantly shot his ice-cold palm at Yi Shiwen, which froze the surrounding air. He clearly knew that among all the top masters present there, Yi Shiwen was biggest threat to his plan, and as long as he could kill Yi Shiwen, he would still have an opportunity to restore the situation. Otherwise, ultimately, he along with his plan would be completely obliterated at the hands of Yi Shiwen. Shangguan Shuani knew that he could not kill Yi Shiwen alone, so his only option was to team up with the yellow-robed youth and attack together. Yi Shiwen immediately sensed Shangguan Zuani's palm attack and shot his palm once again, containing the terrifying might have passed like thunder move like the wind, which released a thunder-like Jinqi and fiercely collided with the ice-cold Jinqi. Bang! Two groups of Jinqi collided and blasted shock waves in all directions. Shangguan Xuani was thrown back several steps and secretly complained about the incredible strength of Yi Shiwen in his heart. But at this time, the yellow-robed youth rushed once again towards Yi Shiwen, although he was collaborating with Shangguan Xuani, but this was only a temporary cooperation as he had ulterior motives. However, right now, he could not attend to his motives because his top priority was to kill Yi Shiwen. Otherwise, all of them would be killed instead. Yi Feng also wanted to go and help, but when he saw that Yi Shiwen was easily handling both of their attacks, as if he was just playing with them, then he decided not to interfere. When the duo had teamed up to attack, they had soon gotten used to timing their attacks and were displaying a perfect team play, expecting to push Yi Shiwen in a disadvantageous situation. But in a while, Yi Shiwen had easily adapted to their combined assault. After playing around with them for a while, the next time they shot their attacks at him, he suddenly released a terrifying Bladiki and displayed the creative concept of full moon beheader. Bang! The creative concept turned into the picture of a bright moon descending from the clouds and directly collided with their combined attack and crushed it. Then it finally descended towards the two masters. They couldn't resist against the terrifying might of this attack and turned into streamers and vanished from the Huanma territory. Without these two top masters out of the picture, the people of their team knew that it was over for them and immediately began to disperse. Although Bingdao Subschool was a major subschool with a lot of Xiantian masters, but so was Jade Lady Subschool, and under the leadership of top masters like Yi Feng, Zhang Sanyuan, and Yi Shiwen, they would be quickly killed by the opposite party. And the crowd of spectating disciples waiting for an opportunity also started to leave in abundance and did not dare to stay for a long time. They knew very well that if the disciples of opposite party lost their temper and started to attack, then in the presence of these three top masters, especially Yi Shiwen, they would only meet an unexpected calamity. Third brother, this time we were saved thanks to you, Yi Feng said, and walked towards Yi Shiwen with a smile on his face and somewhat sighing with emotion. If Yi Shiwen had not descended from the sky like an angel to save them, then they would really have met an awful end. It's nothing but brother. Yi Shiwen looked at Yi Feng and was surprised to find out that his brother had actually reached the peak of Xiantian third stage. But last time he was only at the peak of Xiantian first stage, which meant that in a period of 1 month his cultivation had unexpectedly jumped 2 stages. This situation was too weird. This was truly bizarre. Yi Zaiwen's mind couldn't grasp it at all. Brother, could it be that you a blood yuan fruit? An idea suddenly cropped up in Yi Zaiwen's mind because only while having a breakthrough in the Xiantian second stage and consuming a blood yuan fruit, one could have a dramatic increase in cultivation and strength in a short time. However, this was not right, as his elder brother was definitely not an unwise person. Everyone knew that after entering into the Xiantian realm, the later one would consume this precious blood yuan fruit. The better would be the effects. The best time to consume it was during having a breakthrough in Xiantian second stage, or while breaking through from Xiantian 8th stage to Xiantian 9th stage. As the later one would consume this fruit, the bigger would be the benefits. That's how it was. Some IRL stuff came up, so grand release will get delayed to Sunday morning. Raised so far, $230, 766%. Thanks to Toby Hansen, UK, Giannis Macri, Switzerland, Shay Fincher, US, and Etienne Bedard, Canada, for sponsoring the coming sponsored chapters for which release declaration will be made later on. Chapter 102. NT. Thanks to Toby Hansen, UK, for sponsoring Chapter 102. Also, sorry guys, grand release for Saturday has been delayed to Sunday because I got sick. So for now, enjoy this chapter. Chapter 102. Assessment ends even during the time when Yi Shiwen was in Qingfeng Mountain Subschool. He knew how precious a blood yuan fruit actually was for Xiantian masters. If it was not extremely valuable, then why would it attract the attention of so many people, although it was only valuable for the masters of Xiantian realm? But there were a million Xiantian masters in the main sect, and most of them were stuck at bottlenecks, so one could imagine the preciousness of blood yuan fruit in their eyes. From the moment he had obtained a blood yuan fruit, Yishuin had decided that he would wait until the day he would have his breakthrough from the Xiantian 8th stage to Xiantian 9th stage, because at that time having a breakthrough would be very difficult and it would take a lot of effort. He would also need treasures like blood yuan fruit to help him during the breakthrough. Many people could never reach the Xiantian 7th or 8th stage even after practicing throughout their lives. They would stay on Xiantian 5th stage for a lifetime because it was considered a big threshold. Those who could cross this threshold would become intermediate level personnel in Yuan School's main sect, and the most incompetent ones would be sent to become elders at the sub-schools. But those who could get past this threshold could only spend their lifetime as lower-level staff. Even if Yi Feng had used the blood yuan fruit during his breakthrough from Xiantian 5th stage to 6th stage, then it was worth it. But he used it at only the 1st stage, which was such a pity. Later, Yi Shiwen heard from various disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, and finally came to know the ins and outs of everything that had happened during his absence. After Yi Feng and the group of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool had separated from him, they met the group of Jade Lady Subschool and helped them in repelling a Huanma raid. Afterwards, the two groups cooperated to attain their goal of searching and killing as many Huanma devils as they could. While fighting and killing the Huanma, they encountered a very formidable Huanma of Xiantian 5th stage, which seemed to have high intelligence, and at that moment it was next to a coffin. After the two groups discussed for a bit, they decided to fight and kill the Huanma, which was still mourning next to the coffin. After killing it, as expected, they obtained a magical sound flute, which was actually a spiritual tool, although it was only a low-level spiritual tool. But after reaching the Xiantian stages above Xiantian 5th stage, the Xiantian Jin Qi would transform into Xiantian Jin Yuan, and then it would be possible to drive a spiritual tool to display its infinite power, not to mention, using a magical sound flute, one could display the rare spiritual sonic attack, making this flute even more precious. This was the reason when the news about the flute had leaked out, it had attracted Shangguan Shuani and others. Yi Shiwen looked at the dark-colored flute hanging on the waist of Zhang Senyuin and sighed, then shook his head. How could he not understand that his brother liked Zhang Senyuin and was even willing to let go of a precious spiritual tool for that? Even though a spiritual tool could be used only after surpassing the Xiantian 5th stage, but one should know that even among the core disciples of the main sect, only less than 10% of them had spiritual tools. This magical sound flute was unimaginably precious, but Yi Feng didn't feel the slightest heartache from losing it. Yi Shiwen thought that this matter of Yi Feng consuming the blood yuan fruit so early was definitely related to Zhang Senyuin. Yi Feng was at the peak of Xiantian 1st stage, and even if he had a breakthrough, he could only reach the Xiantian 2nd stage, but Zhang Senyuin was already at the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage. So, this might be the reason why Yi Feng had decided to consume the blood yuan fruit, because now, like Zhang Senyuin, he was also at the peak of Xiantian 3rd stage, and thanks to the benefits of blood yuan fruit, it wouldn't be long before he would again have a breakthrough to the Xiantian 4th stage, and then he could proudly be alongside Zhang Senyuin. Regarding this matter, the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool were also well aware of, so they were not commenting about why the magical sound flute was with Zhang Senyuin. Yi Shiwen sighed and also didn't say anything. He certainly didn't have any opinion because marriage, giving birth, and so on, even if the warriors tried their best to avoid these, they couldn't, as this was a type of instinct that continued the life. Although it was said that the goal of a master should be to continue practicing and get rid of the worldly desires, gain immortality, but it was all just a legend. In this world, there were many heroes and no one knew who would die, who would become invincible. However, that was something in the future, and who knew what would happen afterwards. Moreover, no one knew about Zhang Senyuin's feelings. But it was easy to ascertain the feelings of Zhang Sunyuan, as Yi Feng's attitude towards her was very obvious and was clearly indicating that he liked her, but that she was showing no signs of dislike, and it seemed like it was possible that they would get together very soon. Yi Shiwen was also trying to learn some of the tricks used by his big brother. After all, in his past life, he had seen various cultures and prosperous civilizations, and there were a variety of special tricks used by the guys to impress girls, and he had learned some of them back then. After all, they could become useful anytime. In Yi Zaiwen's mind, a myriad of thoughts were constantly welling up, but he did not display any expression on his face and glanced at the crowd of Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School. This time, they had faced serious losses with 10 dead, but the remaining people had become stronger compared to the last time he had seen them. Many of them were on the border of having a breakthrough, and then they would enter into the Xiantian realm. The strongest expert besides Yi Feng was Zhang Yang, who had already transformed 30% Xiantian Jinqi and had achieved the Xiantian Xiaokan stage, and had also consolidated his state with a very steady breath. Once he would transform 40% Xiantian Jinqi, he would be able to reach the peak of Xiantian second stage. Wu Hao and Qian Wanru had actually reached the Xiantian first stage by transforming 10% Xiantian Jinqi. Yi Ruxiwa had also shown a great progress, as she had steadily transformed 20% Xiantian Jinqi and had reached the peak of Xiantian first stage. During this month, everyone had shown great progress. Yi Shiwen nodded, as he knew that only by colliding with talented and strong evildoers, one could have rapid and unceasing advancement in strength. If they were still at the Qingfeng Mountain Sub-School, they wouldn't have shown this kind of fast progress, because only in the presence of strong peers one wouldn't slack off and would always strive to get stronger. But anyways, the assessment had finally ended, and it was time for the allocation of disciples in various peaks. Raised so far, $200, 666%. Chapter 103, NT. This chapter is a regular release for Sunday. Chapter 103 enters into the Tongtian Peak inside the Palace Hall of Tongtian Peak. Two figures could be seen walking side by side. They were Yan Chiling and Yi Shiwen. Brother, yes, blade technique is really amazing. I am afraid very few among the disciples would be able to display this kind of superb blade skill. Yan Chiling said, there are a lot of talented individuals among the disciples, and many of them know blade techniques. Yi Shiwen lightly replied, Brother Yi is being modest. When it comes to strength, there are many strong masters among the disciples, and maybe more powerful than us, but when your blade skills come into picture, I have not seen anyone displaying the creative concept of a blade technique like you did back then. Even among the inner disciples of the main sect, very few can achieve such a feat, Yan Chiling said with a smile. It was not that Yan Chiling was intending to curry favor from Yi Shiwen, but 3 days ago, that display of the creative concept of Yi Zaiwen's blade technique was truly unforgettable and had thoroughly imprinted on the minds of everyone who witnessed it, including Yan Chiling. 3 days had passed after the completion of the assessment examination. Everyone had entered into one peak or the other, but they never thought that they would get a chance to witness a strange scene where a group of old men was chasing Yi Shiwen to grab him and monopolize him for their respective peaks. Yi Shiwen also thought that Yuan School was so big, and almost every year many talented individuals would emerge from here. Every 3 years it held an assessment examination and had continued to do so for God knows how many years, in which numerous geniuses had emerged. But a strange scene like this, where a group of old people were rushing to grab a disciple, had never happened before. Just what kind of multi-talented evildoer was he? In this world, there were no devices or tests to check who was more talented than the other. It was all decided by the display of strength, and even if there was such a thing to test one's talent, Yi Shiwen never considered himself as the most outstanding one. So why would these old men chase after him? Of course, high-level attention was inevitable. As to which high-level personnel's attention he had attracted, he did not know. The next day, he got the news that he had been assigned to the Tongtian Peak, which was considered as one of the top 10 prominent peaks of Yi Yuan School's main sect, and it was definitely not one of the bottom ones among the 10. And among those who had entered into the Tongtian Peak, he knew only a few, and Yan Qiliang was one of them. Yi Feng, Zhang Yang, and Wu Hao had entered into the Full Moon Peak. Zhang Sun Yuan, Yi Ruxiwei, and Qian Wanru had entered into the Jade Lady Peak. Basically, they had been allocated to different peaks, of course. Full Moon Peak was the best among them, but it was never guaranteed that as long as one possessed great strength, he would be assigned to the best peak. The allocation was done, keeping in mind the balanced development of all the top 10 peaks. If they only wanted to strengthen the Full Moon Peak, then why would they even need to have the other 9 peaks? Although there was still a gap between the strengths of the peaks, but that was the reason why this type of allocation system was followed to maintain the overall balance of power. After getting assigned to the Tongtian Peak, Yi Xuan saw many unfamiliar faces, but among them, Yan Qiliang was a relatively familiar person and had quickly got acquainted with him. As far as the disciples from other sub-schools were concerned, they would gradually get to know each other and come together. In addition to the 2 of them, there were more than 200 disciples assigned to the Tongtian Peak. As Yan Qiliang was one of the top masters, soon all of these new disciples had gathered to his side. Before entering into the main sect, the new disciples were not allowed to form factions, but that was not the case after entering into the main sect. Now they could form factions because if they didn't, then they would most likely be bullied by the senior disciples. Unlike the sub-schools in the main sect, new disciples would generally form factions as when they were in their respective sub-schools. They didn't need to form factions because they would have to enter the main sect someday, but after entering into the main sect, things would change. The disciples would form factions, and years later, when these disciples would become true disciples, they would still have these factions. In the Yi Yuan School, there were many well-known factions, led by hundreds of true disciples, and excluding some true disciples who preferred to stay alone. Almost all of the true disciples had their own factions with a powerful figure as the faction leader. The current triennial assessment examination was a good opportunity to pull the cronies into the faction. As for the factions formed by the true disciples, they would only accept core disciples as the members, and unless there was an extremely talented individual among the new disciples who had managed to impress them, it was highly unlikely for the new disciples to enter into those high-level factions. Generally, these factions created by the new disciples were headed by star disciples like Yi Xuan and Yan Qiliang, but Yi Xuan was not interested in forming a faction. Those true disciples would form factions and manage them themselves, but he was not at all interested in leading or managing other new disciples. So forming a faction was out of question. Other new disciples of the Tongtian Peak had sensed that Yi Xuan was not interested in making a faction, so they had flocked around Yan Qiliang. In addition to Yan Qiliang and more than 200 disciples, among the new disciples, there was yet another group composed of foreign disciples, led by the yellow-robed disciple who had been beheaded by Yi Xuan in the Huanma territory. During these days, Yi Xuan found out that his name was Huang Yilin, an outstanding disciple from Huangyu sect. It was considered a big clan, although it was not comparable to Yi Yuan School, but was still a tyrannical force. As they said, it was easy to survive in a group. Now the 2 of us have entered into the Tongtian Peak. Later we may enter the same sect, so I would like Brother Yi to advise me. Yan Qiliang said, although Yi Xuan was younger than him, but in this world strong people would command respect, and Yi Zaiwen's strength was above him. That is, if in the future we enter the same sect, then I would also expect mutual support. Yi Xuan said with a smile because he didn't want to openly show his indifference, as it would only invite new enemies. Right now, Brother Yan has become the leader of a lot of new disciples, which is quite amazing. When the time comes, I would expect a lot of help from you. Yi Xuan said with some ridicule for Yan Qiliang, as he had a favorable impression for the guy, although he was somewhat sophisticated and shrewd. But in general, he was a fairly open and candid guy. Yan Qiliang wryly smiled and said, It looks okay for now, but in few days the faction of those senior disciples would come into action, then things will start to get difficult for us. Brother Yi, to be honest with you, yesterday 2 factions of true disciples came looking for me. I just hope I can join them. True disciples? Yi Shiwen said in a startled manner. Well, Yan Qiliang nodded, and a wry smile appeared on his face. These high-level factions didn't care about average new disciples, but Yan Qiliang was definitely not an average individual, even if he was not as good as Yi Shiwen, but he was powerful enough to impress the high-level factions. Yi Shiwen was silent for a moment. If the factions of those true disciples were trying to recruit new disciples, then it wouldn't be good to refuse them. If I am not wrong, they will soon come to ask you, do you want to join their faction as well? Chapter 104. NT? Thanks to Toby Hansen UK for sponsoring Chapter 104. Chapter 104. Senior disciples are big bullies. If I am not wrong, they will soon come to ask you, do you want to join their faction as well? Yan Qiliang asked. When Yi Shiwen was not interested in forming or joining an ordinary faction, then why would he want to join the faction of a true disciple? But he won't be able to refuse if they come to invite him, because if he did, it would only represent the beginning of a big trouble. If the faction belonged to an open-minded true disciple, then it was okay to refuse them. But if it belonged to some arrogant true disciple, then, after getting rejected, he was bound to retaliate. Seeing the silent appearance of Yi Shiwen, Yan Qiliang couldn't help but smiled bitterly. Becoming the faction leader was definitely not good. Although he would have the support of many new disciples, but their faction would still not be very durable. Sooner or later, other factions would send their people to snatch new disciples for their factions, and if they didn't agree, they would face the collaborated suppression from the major factions. These newcomers were considered outstanding disciples of their respective sub-schools. However, after entering into the main sect, their strength could only be considered mediocre. Among the 200 new disciples, only 20 or so were truly worthy of being called strong and were the masters of Xiantian realm, and the remaining more than 180 were just outer disciples, who were still in the Hotian realm, and their status was only a little better than the status of the handyman disciples. In the past, some outstanding new disciples had tried to form their own factions and had contended against the factions of the senior disciples. But soon their newly formed faction had been disbanded under the collaborated suppression of the senior factions. Yi Shiwen sighed as deep in his heart he didn't want to join factions because once joined he would be urged to have human contacts, and that would completely ruin his concentration, which would ultimately decrease the pace of his cultivation growth. There was a lot of competition in the main sect, and he didn't want to waste time on all this. He silently returned to his freshman small courtyard. All of the new disciples had received these courtyards where they could live and practice. If it was a top core disciple of the main sect, he would have an independent palace on the mountain, and true disciples had their own personal mountain peaks. People of different strengths received different treatment based on their status and positions. Yi Shiwen entered his courtyard. Although inner disciples could only have small, independent courtyards, but these courtyards were quite exquisite with pavilions, rock garden with running water, just like a botanical garden. In the entire courtyard, small sections of spiritual arteries were buried underground which would induce large amount of divine ling qi in entire courtyard. And looking from afar, one could see xian qi in abundance, making the courtyard look like the dwelling place of immortals. A variety of Zhen methods to attract the divine ling qi, defensive Zhen methods, Zhen method to concentrate Xinjing qi, and so on were carved on the ground. But the core method to activate these Zhen methods was known only to the owner of the courtyard. NT, Xinjing, divine calm. No wonder everyone wants to enter into the main sect. This practice environment is 100 times better compared with that of the sub-schools. Yi Shiwen sighed and said, the talented disciples coming from these sub-schools would get various resources, and after practicing in this kind of favorable practice environment of main sect, they would be able to rapidly grow stronger compared to when they were in the sub-schools, because here they would have rapid advancements and quicker breakthroughs. Even the outer disciples had been provided with 1 room per person, and these rooms also had various Zhen methods prepared inside, although the rooms were small but fully equipped. This time he went to the Gongda Palace Hall of Tongtian Peak to receive his rewards, and for displaying outstanding performance in the assessment examination. He got a total of 5,000 spirit stones from the Tongtian Peak, which allowed his total stock of spirit stones to reach a total of 7,000 spirit stones. Antique Gongda, merits and achievements, all the policies of the sect were generally inclined in favor of the talented disciples, and it was made sure that the talented disciples would receive the best resources and in greater amounts. In addition to the spirit stones, he also got a variety of medicinal pills, some for healing, some for supplementing Zhen Qi, etc., but Yi Shiwen was very much happy to receive a Xian Jindan. Its efficacy and effects were similar to that of the blood yuan fruit. However, it was still not comparable to a blood yuan fruit because it only gave short-term effects, and though it could help during the breakthrough, but its utility was limited for only the masters of Xiantian 5th stage or below. In addition to Yi Shiwen, only Yan Qiliang got a Xian Jindan for his outstanding performance. But Yi Shiwen believed that the sect's inclination towards giving top resources to only the outstanding disciples would only work towards increasing the gap between geniuses and ordinary people. In addition to these, there are some clothes completely made of ice cicada silk, warm in winter and cool in summer. Moreover, the defense offered by these clothes was very strong and could give good protection from weapons. These clothes were similar to the cicada silk armor of Yi Shiwen, but here in the Yiyuan school, they were present in abundance. Besides these, there were all sorts of equipments which clearly demonstrated the excessive wealth of Yiyuan school. One could say that joining the main sect did not represent the end, but an entirely new beginning. Yi Shiwen was about to start closed-door training when suddenly, from outside his courtyard, he heard the sound of rapid footsteps, and then a voice reached his ears. "Brother Yi! Brother Yi! Come in." Yi Shiwen released the defensive Zhen method, as he was the owner of the courtyard, and only he had the authority to unlock the defensive method. Otherwise, no one would be able to enter. Even the intruders would have to attack with a Zhen method to barge in. Right then, a disciple who appeared to be in his 20s ran into the room and looked at Yi Shiwen with an anxious look on his face. "What happened?" Yi Shiwen asked. This disciple was one of the disciples of Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, and was the only disciple from Qingfeng Mountain Subschool, other than Yi Shiwen, who had also been assigned to the Tongtian Peak. "Those senior disciples go too far. They have joined up to suppress us." The disciple said, "For the last few days, those senior factions have been sending people to pull people from among us, but our fellow brothers and sisters have decided to join the faction led by Brother Yen, so they began to force us, and said that we need to surrender our monthly salary as compensation to them, and if not paid, then they would start to bully us every day." Yi Shiwen frowned. So these senior disciples had truly gone too far, but it was still understandable, as the new disciples were often the source of new members for these factions, and they had to wait 3 years for the assessment examination to recruit members. But now that these new disciples wanted to create a separate faction, then of course they would collaborate together to suppress the new faction. Even if the new disciples didn't disband their new faction and decided to surrender their monthly salary as compensation, then their practice speed would inevitably be adversely affected. This was really a ruthless tactic. Chapter 105. NT. Thanks to Toby Hansen, UK, for sponsoring Chapter 105. Chapter 105. Either disband or die for those senior disciples. This was none other than trying to get more members for their faction, by hook or by crook. But as far as these new disciples were concerned, this was a matter of life and death. These new disciples were considered the outstanding top disciples in their respective sub-schools, and after coming to the main sect and training in this new favorable environment, it was only a matter of time when they would be able to catch up with those senior disciples in terms of cultivation level and strength. So no one was willing to join someone else's faction and become the bottom members, just to be ordered around by them. So when Yan Qiliang, a top disciple among them, wanted to draw them in and form a faction, they would naturally be willing to do so. Now they have blocked the gate, forcefully asking us to surrender the monthly compensation, which is simply going too far. The disciple said and clenched his teeth. Basically, the senior disciples were forcing them to either disband their new faction, or they would be crushed forcefully. No matter which option they chose, it was not going to produce a good result. In the hearts of these new disciples, Yen Qiliang had already taken place as the leader of their faction, and naturally Yixuan was already the core of their confidence, although Yixuan had not publicly pulled anyone into the faction. But everyone knew about his incredible strength and also knew that he would definitely back them up if something happened. Yixuan said, "I will go and take a look." He was also related to this matter. After all, he was also one of the disciples who had been charged with paying a monthly compensation, and how could he just sit back and let them take his hard-earned monthly salary, which was also the source of his quick progress? Sooner or later, he would have to get involved, so why shouldn't he get involved now itself? If Brother Yi is going to come in action, then there certainly won't be any problem. The disciple said in an overjoyed tone, but he originally knew that Yixuan would definitely lend a helping hand to them. After all, before, he had always shown a righteous nature, and that disciple was well aware of that. Also, he knew that Yixuan was not interested in forming or joining a faction. So if he got to know that senior disciples were trying to forcefully recruit members, then he would naturally react. Yixuan followed the disciple out of his own small courtyard. Only the new disciples who had arrived this year lived in the freshman courtyard. And although the inner disciples controlled the courtyard, but the outer disciples also lived in the same courtyard. There was no separation between the housing of inner and outer disciples, and the new disciples had no choice, because only after becoming core disciples they would be able to choose a place to live. Until then, all of them would have to live together in the same courtyard. After coming out of the courtyard, he saw the crowd of many new disciples concentrated at the intersection, and they were being led by Yen Qiliang. At this time, Yen Qiliang had an unsightly complexion, because 10 senior disciples were blocking the intersection. There were indifferent looks on the faces of these senior disciples while they were looking at the new disciples, and their leader was a black-robed youth who looked approximately 25-year-old. He stepped forward and said, "I won't waste any time on nonsense. I give you 2 options. First, each of you hand over your monthly salary as compensation. Second, disband your faction." The words of this senior disciple aroused the anger of the new disciples. After all, this was no different than cornering all of them. "We know that you are doing this just to corner all of us." A new disciple said angrily, "We can let you off, and it's very simple. As long as you dissolve this shitty faction of yours and join our foodie faction, then we will take you in, and you can also save your monthly salary." The black-robed youth sneered and said, "I'm quite looking forward to take a look at the compensation. I heard that a lot of geniuses have entered into the main sect this year, so all of them must have got rich rewards. Ah, I can't wait to see." And foodie, to prostrate, the faces of many new disciples immediately suffused with anger. They were the elite core disciples of their respective sub-schools, but right now they were being bullied. On the way, Yixuan heard from the disciple that the faction who had come to bully them was named Foodie Faction and had been started by a core disciple. There were more than 100 members in this faction, and all of them were Xiantian masters. However, this faction was considered as moderately strong compared to the factions started by the core disciples. "I advise you to disband your faction as soon as possible. I have seen many cocky new disciples in the past trying to form their own faction. They too were unyielding in the beginning, but in the end they also had to submit. The new outer disciples are more sensible than you lot, as they have already disbanded their faction and joined our faction." The black-robed youth indifferently said, "You are going too far with the bullying." Yen Qiliang said in a calm and collected manner, "So what if we are going too far?" The black-robed youth sneered again and again, then said, "It seems that you people only understand the language of fists. I heard that you are a top disciple among this year's new disciples, and that's why they have decided to make you the leader. I'd like to see what you got." The black-robed youth sneered, then suddenly a claw congealed around his palm, and in a flash, with a loud boom, it rushed to grab the skull of Yen Qiliang. "Shameless!" Yen Qiliang shouted loudly, and his aura completely broke out, and then an endless amount of flaming red Jin Qi wrapped around his arm, like fire in general, and he instantly blasted a punch towards the incoming claw. Boom! Both claw and fist fiercely collided, and an endless amount of Zhen Qi spread in the surrounding, sending out terrifying whirlwind in all directions. Both of them took a step back because, unexpectedly, they had almost equal strengths. The black-robed youth's complexion suddenly changed. He did not think that Yan Qiling's strength would actually be this fierce, although he had heard that a lot of genius disciples had arrived at the main sect this year. But he did not care. After all, he had joined the main sect 9 years ago and was 10 years ahead of Yan Qiling. However, he had miscalculated because, at their age, 10 years were not enough to decide pretty much anything. But still, he had practiced for more than a decade longer than Yan Qiling and still couldn't suppress him. This had brought a hint of jealousy in his eyes, which quickly turned into a killing intent, caused by the envy. How could this guy have so much talent? Yan Qiling had not even started to practice inside the main sect and could still contend with him. In order to achieve his present strength, black-robed youth had spent a whole decade as the outer disciple, and now he had finally reached the peak of Xiantian third stage. Well, not the top, but he could at least play the role of a bully to forcefully recruit members. But what just happened? With a look of envy in his eyes, the black-robed disciple once again stormed towards Yan Qiling. Yan Qiling also sneered and rushed forward to face his attack. As the two sides were fiercely fighting, violent explosion sounds continued to spread. Their punches were casing air explosions, and as their fight grew more intense, the new disciples had to go back several steps, and they did not even dare to stay near this menacing battle. Both of them loathed each other, so one could see the seriousness of their fight. Although the strength of Yan Qiling was essentially stronger, but the black-robed youth had more battle experience. Thus he could kill Yan Qiling if caught off guard. But Yan Qiling was also getting familiar with the attack patterns of the black-robed youth, so defeating him was only a matter of time. But at this time, the other 9 senior disciples noticed the problem that the black-robed disciple was facing. Their eyesight was far developed compared to these new disciples, as it was something that one would gain with time and experience. Chapter 106. NT. Thanks to Toby Hansen UK for sponsoring Chapter 106. Chapter 106 set up their own faction, but at this time the other 9 senior disciples noticed the problem that the black-robed disciple was facing. Their eyesight was far developed compared to these new disciples, as it was something that one would gain with time and experience. At this time, these senior disciples immediately rushed forward in order to assist the black-robed youth, when all of a sudden, a terrifying Bladiki instantly descended from the sky and chopped down in front of them. This terrifying Bladiki instantly split out a huge rift in the ground, extending several meters. Could it be that you senior disciples can only bully others based on your numerical advantage? Yi Shiwen said in a cold voice while pointing his long blade towards them. Among those 9 disciples, there were many at the peak of Xiantian third stage and weren't one bit weaker than the black-robed youth. But at this time, all of them were covered in cold sweat. If they had been a little faster a moment ago, that blade attack would have really beheaded all of them, and just thinking about it, they had been completely stunned. Even they had to admit, if they had not been attentive, they would definitely have been split in half. Just from the fierceness and might present in that blade attack, they had realized that this blade-wielding boy would absolutely not show them any mercy the next time. Although they had heard that a lot of talented disciples had joined the main sect this year, but they didn't expect to see so many formidable Xiantian masters. During the former years, if a new disciple who had entered into the Xiantian realm, then he was considered an extremely outstanding disciple. However, this year, there were just way too many new disciples who had already entered into the Xiantian realm. In the past, they could easily bully those new disciples and would force them to join their faction. But among this year's new disciples, there were some very thorny existences like Yan Qiling and this boy wielding a long blade. They never thought that these new disciples would prove to be so hard to deal with. When they had been sent by the Foodie faction to completely suppress these new disciples, They never expected such an outcome. However, right now, they were entirely sure that if they dared to take even a step further, that blade-wielding boy wouldn't hesitate to behead them right there, right then. And if they tried to tell about this matter to the high-level members of their faction, then they would definitely die in vain. The sudden appearance of Yi Shiwen had completely cornered them. They had come to bully the weak, and their plan had failed, and if they go to tell the elders about this incident, then they would only end up as a laughingstock. The new disciples were looking at Yi Shiwen with a look of worship in their eyes. Of course, they admired Yan Qiliang for fighting against a senior disciple on equal terms. But they simply worshipped Yi Shiwen as he had used just one blade attack, and 9 senior disciples had completely paused and were scared to take a single step forward or backward. They had repressed the feelings of hatred after being oppressed by these top disciples for all these days, but these feelings had finally been vented out thanks to Yi Shiwen. With the unexpected appearance of Yi Shiwen, after a while, the black-robed youth was unable to cope up with the suppressive attacks of Yan Qiliang and continued to dodge one attack after the other. But after a while, Yan Qiliang found an opening and managed to hit a punch on his body. The black-robed youth was sent flying after receiving that punch from Yan Qiliang and heavily fell on the ground, then fell unconscious. "Take him and get lost. Next time, I won't show any mercy." Yan Qiliang gasped and said, "The senior disciples did not stay. It would be ridiculous if they stayed there, especially when Yi Shiwen was eyeing them like a killing god. They would never dare to stay there for a long time. Brother Yi, this time we were saved thanks to your help." Yan Qiliang looked at those departing senior disciples and couldn't help but said with a smile on his face, "It was nothing." Yi Shiwen said, "Brother Yan, I think that we should form a faction." Yi Shiwen still didn't want to be part of a faction, but he preferred to be a part of one than being chased down by others. After all, it was somewhat troublesome, and he wouldn't be able to run away for too long. And even if he was careful and tried to avoid joining any faction, but these people knew where he lived, so rather than joining a faction, it was better for him to form one. "Brother Yi, you mean?" Yan Qiliang said in a delighted tone, although originally their faction was just in the prototype stage, and he could be considered a strong leader who could run a faction. But if Yi Shiwen was willing to join them, then things would be entirely different, because Yi Xiwen's addition to their faction had suddenly increased their strength by many times and had greatly improved the appeal as well. "I am just enrolling. I won't manage the matters inside the faction." Yi Shiwen said that as he didn't want to divert his concentration from practicing to anything else, and even if he had made this decision, but he still wanted to enjoy his unrestrained, complete freedom. "No problem," Yan Qiliang excitedly said. With the addition of Yi Shiwen to the faction, the appeal would immediately increase. And the most important thing was that Yi Shiwen did not want to get involved in the management. So the power would be in his hands. So this was a double benefit for him. "Everybody, please pay attention to what I am going to say. I once again announce that I, together with Brother Yi, am planning to jointly form a faction, and any of the new disciples can join us," Yan Qiliang said in a loud voice. Earlier, the faction was just in name, but after this announcement, and with the addition of Yi Shiwen to the faction, it was finally going to officially form. Some of the new disciples hesitated, because before they were sticking close to Yan Qiliang as they knew that survival was very difficult in the main sect, and only by sticking together one could stay away from unforeseen danger. As Yan Qiliang was a top disciple who had leader-like characteristics, so they had decided to stick with him until things would settle down. Then they would walk away any time. But after they would join the faction, they would be unable to walk away, as it would be equivalent to betraying the faction, and it was absolutely not allowed. In any faction, members were not allowed to leave unless and until they were strong enough to do so. "I will join." A new disciple raised his hand and said, "I have had enough of these senior disciples bullying us. I don't want to be bullied anymore, and getting together is the only way out." "Right, I will also join." "I will join as well. If those senior disciples can create factions, then we would form our own." "You are right. If they can do it, then so can we. After all, we were once the outstanding disciples of our sub-schools, and there's nothing we can't achieve." A disciple said, The other new disciples were also stimulated by this sudden series of approvals, and a large number of new disciples came forward to form the faction. In the past, one more faction had been formed by the new disciples, which later became one of the super factions, and its might stretched across the 10 prominent peaks. The leader of this faction was a true disciple and was also one of the strongest individuals in the Yuan school. Good. Since everybody is willing to join the faction, then our faction has now been officially established, but we must give it a name. Does anyone know a good name for the faction? Yan Chiling asked. Many disciples rushed to say several names, but these names couldn't satisfy the crowd. Finally, a disciple suggested the name Qianyu faction, and it got the consent of most of the disciples, and hence was made the official name of the faction. Many of the disciples were somewhat excited, because from now on, they would be known as the members of the Qianyu faction, and no one could guess how big their faction would grow in the future. Chapter 107. NT. Thanks to Janis Mockery, Switzerland, for sponsoring Chapter 107. Chapter 107. Towards the deepest parts of sect after the creation of Qianyu faction. Yishuin did not participate in the faction matters and left all management works to Yan Chiling, who was obviously handling these matters with ease, as managing was a familiar task for him. As he had gained experience as the strongest disciple of the divine volcano subschool, Yishuin returned to his own small courtyard. And about this aspect, he and Yan Chiling had a tacit understanding. Whether these factions would thrive or fail relied on the managing qualities of its leader. And so long as the leader was formidable and had outstanding leading qualities, then even with 2 or 3 members, the faction could become very formidable. But if the leader was not strong enough, then the faction was bound to disband. At this time, Yan Chiling and Yishuin were the only formidable members of Qianyu faction, but they were strong enough to hoist the flag of their faction in front of everyone. Yishuin realized that perhaps things won't stay so calm in the future, but since he had already decided to join a faction, then he would need to become a lot stronger to back it up. Yishuin had no alternatives, and he didn't have any escape routes as well, as he was already aware of the arrogant attitude of those other factions who would never allow the growth of a faction created by new disciples, and would use any good opportunity to crush them along with their faction. So whether it was to protect oneself or to safeguard the future, he must strive now and prepare himself. Moreover, in his heart, a feeling of comparison had also come into being that if some people had already done it before, then there was no reason why he won't achieve it. At present, Yi Zaiwen's strength had increased considerably compared to his strength 1 month ago when he had just entered into the Xiantian second stage. As he had transformed 60% Xiantian Jin Qi, his fighting strength was comparable to, or even more than that of the peak Xiantian third stage master. And now it was time for him to have a breakthrough. After having a breakthrough and reaching the Xiantian third stage, he would be able to easily beat a master of Xiantian fourth stage. After making up his mind, Yishuin left his small courtyard and immediately went into the direction of Gongda Palace Hall. Tongtian Peak's Gongda Palace Hall looked more luxurious and elaborate and was also the role model for the Gongda Palace Halls of other subschools. Therefore, Yishuin did not actually find it strange after entering the Gongda Palace Hall. After entering the hall, first he turned in 1,000 spirit stones and converted them into 1,000 points. Now his total stock of spirit stones had decreased to a total of 6,000 spirit stones, but he was not sad because he knew that there were a lot of things that spirit stones couldn't buy, and it was necessary to exchange them for school points, but this fact could be considered as a part of the hidden benefits offered at the main sect. Yishuin immediately redeemed the 1,000 points for a red-crowned crane that would become his flying mount for traveling. This red-crowned crane was one of the demon birds used by people as mounts and were raised in the Yuan school's main sect. Because of their gentle nature, good control, and relationship with the rider, they had become the preferred means of transport for many disciples, and thanks to the blood of demon beasts running through their veins, these cranes could fly for thousands of miles without taking rest. However, these demon birds were naturally not cheap, and besides Yishuin, only filthy rich inner disciples could afford a red-crowned crane, and this number was not more than 200 to 300 people out of several thousand inner disciples. Yi Shiwen had chosen a tall crane standing up to more than 2 meters tall, and it was an extremely good means for flying through the air. After Yi Shiwen activated the control method for the red-crowned crane and used the password, it blinked once and jumped high in the sky, and after coming to a stop, it opened its huge wings and flew at a lightning speed towards the depths of the Yi Yuan School. Using the control method, he could directly use his thoughts to communicate with the crane, and that's how he was manipulating the speed and direction of the flight. Yi Yuan School was stacked with many mountain ranges and spreading across each other, and even if he was so high from the ground, he could still hear the roars of countless demon beasts present on those mountains. And as he was flying towards the deeper parts of the Yi Yuan School, these roars were growing even louder. It was said that Yi Yuan School had captured and raised many demon beasts in this mountain forest spread in several square kilometers of area, compared to which the mountain forest of Qingfeng Mountain was nothing. In the main sect, these demon beasts, devils, and other unusual creatures were housed together to be used by the disciples for practicing. The red-crowned crane's flying speed was extremely fast, and he could feel its lightning-fast speed, because only after flying for about half an hour they had crossed the entire mountain range. This had made him very certain that buying a crane was certainly not a bad idea, and by paying 1,000 points, he had saved a lot of time that he would have wasted by walking for several days to cover the same distance. The crane descended on a flat land, and after Yi Shiwen jumped off from its back, it again flapped its wings and flew high into the sky, waiting for the next summon from him. Yi Shiwen was surprised to actually hear the continuous roars of demon beasts one after the other in the entire mountain forest, and these roars were hoarse, sharp, low, and deep, which could cause goosebumps to anyone who heard them. Occasionally, he would also see some disciples atop their demon birds flying in the sky. Yi Shiwen knew that time was running out, and he must break through as soon as possible in order to face the challenges later. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate anymore, and with a burst of Jin Qi under his feet, his body dashed towards the forest like a shell and directly entered the forest. Soon he had gently and swiftly passed innumerable big trees and had entered the depths of the forest. Raised so far, $100, 333%. Monday, Chapter 110 will come as a regular release. Thanks to Shay Fincher, US, and Etienne Bedard, Canada, for sponsoring Chapter 108. Thanks to Etienne Bedard, Canada. For sponsoring Chapter 109, thanks to Etienne Bedard, Canada, and Joseph Gange, US, for sponsoring Chapter 111, thanks to Joseph Gange, US, for opening the queue for sponsored Chapter 112.